You're listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Happy 4th of July to all our American viewers and listeners, celebrating how you rose up and overthrew a tyrannical imperial power, only to become a tyrannical imperial power yourselves. A classic case of the abused becoming the abuser. But have a nice day anyway, why don't you? Labour in total crisis. If they got the result they got against me on Thursday, they'd be left with less than 100 members of Parliament. Just think about that. It's coming home, hark here. And why did Hancock hang on? Why didn't Boris Johnson sack him? In the midst of speculation that the Hancock affair cost the Tories a by-election win, which would have made everything look different. How long is President Mahmoud Abbas going to sit like Buddha in his chair in Ramallah, becoming a bit of an abuser himself? And what about the US and UK media? We'll be talking to expert guests on all of these matters. But on one, we're breaking new ground. It's 100 years since the foundation of the Chinese Communist Party, and we'll be looking at how they have done. They have just lifted 800 million people out of poverty, despite ghastly and disastrous errors from time to time, some of which continue. But is the Chinese system the most successful system known to man? Buckle up.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Welcome to all our viewers and listeners from across the globe, but especially in the United States on this Independence Day celebration. Anything I say that is perceived as hurtful by some people in the United States is said with the best of intentions. I'm one of the few people on the left in British politics with American blood in my veins. My great-great-grandmother got on the boat in New York and sailed all the way to Dundee. Well, you could see her mistake. The reality is that you can listen to us in crystal clarity in the US on FM 105.5. That's the magic number. Donald Trump used to listen. Joe Biden doesn't know the schedule, so probably isn't. But more and more people in and around the US Capitol are tuning in to hear what people think around the world of them. You can listen on AM all across the United States, from burning city to burning city. You can listen all over the world thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. If you're watching, though, as 500,000 of you are now steadily every week, you can watch on Twitter, you can watch on Instagram, you can watch on Twitch, you can watch on my Telegram channel, you can watch on my YouTube channel and RT's multiple YouTube channels, or on my Facebook or RT's multiple Facebook pages. And if you are on Facebook, please share now with everyone in your address book. Let them know that the mother of all talk shows has begun. Now, if Labour got the share of the vote that they got against me and others on Thursday in the Batley and Spen by-election, they would have fewer than 100 MPs at the next general election. Cue great celebration and the song from Keir Starmer that Labour is coming home. Well, coming home back to the levels of 1922, perhaps, because that would be the last time that Labour had fewer than 100 MPs. A lot of bilge has been talked about the by-election in Batley and Spen, and it's not difficult to see why. A deluge of fake news has spewed out of the fake news industry, otherwise known as the lamestream media. Almost every word of it is a lie. Some of it is the reverse of the truth, and all of it will come out in the court action that I have launched to have the result of the by-election set aside. Not because I'm claiming I won it, although some observers at the count are very clear that I was winning it, until a large and, well, frankly, unprovenanced number of votes were brought in and shuffled onto the table, but I'm not claiming that I won it. Neither do I want it set aside so that I can be the candidate in another by-election, for I will not be. But I'm determined that democracy must not just be done, but be seen to be done. And my legal case is roughly as follows. The winning margin on the night, officially, was less than 1%. According to the law, the returning officer should order a recount of all the votes when the winning margin is less than 1%, unless that would be unreasonable. Well, it's hard to see what would be unreasonable about a recount on a majority of 323 votes after all the huffing and puffing in the Batley and Spen by-election. You would have thought that the returning officer would be only too keen to show that the result being returned was truly the result. But she was not. The Conservative runner-up demanded a recount. It was refused. I demanded a recount. It was refused. No reason for the refusal was given. A vital point when this matter comes before the courts. Secondly, and you may have seen on social media, and American viewers and listeners may recognize this, video footage of large numbers of votes arriving in the dead of night in bin bags, in black plastic bin bags, unsealed, unclosed, and being stuffed into ballot boxes. Perhaps that was the slew of votes that the counting agents of other parties have reported to me that they saw at the count. The 16,000 postal vote applications were always suspicious because letting a Labour council, let alone Kirklees Labour council, in charge of 16,000 postal votes and expecting fairness and transparency would be a triumph of hope over experience. Because anybody who has ever fought Labour in the inner cities knows exactly what Labour does with postal votes. I don't need to spell it out to British listeners and viewers, but to Americans, let me just say that Labour learned everything it could from the Tammany Hall Democrats and more. Thirdly, the Kirklees Labour Council, on the Monday of the final week of the campaign, at public expense, sent out its workforce to illegally remove thousands of my posters from around the constituency. The law is very clear that posters must have an imprint showing who the party that was posting the posters were. Not that that was difficult to work out, because my face and my name and vote for me was all over them. We had an imprint. The law makes no reference whatsoever to the size of the imprint, beyond that it must be readable. Ours were. But 3 days before polling day, the Labour Council in Kirklees, which was counting the votes on the Thursday, which was carrying the postal votes around in unsealed bin bags, decided to take my posters and only my posters down by the thousand at the taxpayers' expense. This a council that claims to be so cash-strapped that it cannot fill in the potholes in its roads so large you could lie down and sleep in them. Coincidentally, on the very day that the Kirklees Council began removing my posters, Labour published yet another election leaflet saying Galloway is running out of steam, just as my posters began disappearing from every street in the constituency. Then there was the budget-busting bonanza that Labour spent on the by-election. There is a spending limit of £100,000. Labour bust it by at least twice, maybe 3 times, when the salaries of all the scores of trade union officials and their union cars, their hotels, their living expenses are factored into the election expenses, plus all the Facebook advertising, plus all the leaflets. It all adds up to a budget buster, every penny of which the court will force them to account. Then there was the false statements made about me and about our party, the Workers' Party of Britain, made not by the Labour camp, but on screen by the Labour candidate. Her lips moving, she uttered some of the most damning false statements it's possible to imagine. Those of you with long memories of British politics will remember the name Phil Woollis. Phil Woollis was a friend of mine once upon a time, worked for me once upon a time, was expelled from Parliament and disqualified from ever standing again for making false statements about his Liberal Democrat opponent in a general election, which were far, far less damning than the statements attributed to me. I give you just one example or two. My Labour opponent said on television, which was rebroadcast on every television channel in Britain and all over social media, ad nauseum, with commentary, with narrative, that when she was being harangued by an Islamist extremist, I was on the other side of the road laughing. In fact, I was on the same side of the road as she was, as the incident was. I was 100 yards away. I was on camera being interviewed when it was happening, and I was not laughing. This false statement was used, is still being used, even today, as the base of a false narrative, deliberately false narrative, to damage my chances in the election, which is a crime under English electoral law. It is actually a criminal offence to do so. And the video and photographic evidence of the falsity of this claim is readily available and will be, of course, placed in front of the court. Practically every news outfit in Britain said that my supporters had thrown an egg at Labour campaigners. The fact that a 15-year-old minor with drug problems and absolutely no connection to our campaign has now been arrested for throwing an egg at Labour campaigners hasn't shut them up. In fact, it hasn't even been reported, though the entire fake news industry knows that fact, that the egging and any other false allegations will all be on the judge's table when this matter comes to court. I could go on, but I see I've gone on long enough. Let's just leave it at this. The Batley and Spen by-election isn't over yet. Why this blizzard of slander and libel? Well, to deflect attention from the fact that though they claimed I had come from nowhere, I was a carpetbagger. I didn't know my way around the constituency. I wasn't from round here. How would I get from A to B? Did I need a guide, they said. I got 22% of the vote from nowhere. More than 8,000 votes I took off Labour, leaving them with the aforementioned share of the vote, which would give them fewer than 100 MPs if repeated in a general election. Enough of that. Is the Labour crisis over? If Labour had lost, would Keir Starmer have been challenged? Is Angela Rayner really limbering up for a leadership challenge? Will the Blairites expel her before she gets the chance? Will Keir Starmer sack her as Labour's deputy leader, or at least strip her of all authority? These are all questions that I'll discuss with the former Labour Member of Parliament, Chris Williamson, in just a minute. Was the Hancock affair and Boris Johnson's bumbling handling of it one of the reasons why the Conservatives failed to capture the seat? And with the killing of a Palestinian journalist, not by Israel, but by the Palestinian National Authority under Mahmoud Abbas, which has triggered massive upheaval on the West Bank and in Jerusalem, lead to the resignation, the standing down of the long-serving tyrant who became what he calls the president of the Palestinian Authority. We'll be talking to the one and only Abdel Bari Atwan on that subject. We'll be talking to Tom McGregor on the 100th anniversary of the foundation of the Chinese Communist Party. We'll be talking to Caleb Maupin about what's going down on the other side of the Atlantic, in the media and in the political world. And we'll be talking to the one and only Patrick Christys, effervescent as always, and in the studio. How wonderful a return to normality is it when I can sit in the studio with Patrick Christys. So stay tuned, why don't you, for the next 3 hours. It's going to be riveting. Is football coming home? Is our first poll. Will England win the Euros? I vote yes. It's A for yes, B for no, C anyone but. That's obviously a churlish addition by my editor, Mr. Ron Mackay, who for quite perverse reasons is wearing a very lurid Scotland football top this evening. But here's the break question. It's the 4th of July today, the anniversary of the 1776 Declaration of Independence of the United States. Who drafted the Declaration? Was it A. Thomas Jefferson, B. George Washington, C. Benjamin Franklin? Answers when I come back after the break.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Comrade, tired of being trapped in mainstream media? Join the revolution with mother of all talk shows. Has been instrumental in making brain and heart of people stronger, like kettlebell for mind. Don't be brainwashed, CC, an open mind to new way of thinking. If you don't know how, George will teach you. If you won't learn, he will make you. Speak to Comrade Galloway if you think you're hard enough on the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, who drafted the Declaration of Independence? All the Americans got it, but I wonder how many British people did. The answer is A. Thomas Jefferson. Now, Chris Williamson, like me, a former Labour Member of Parliament, like me, drummed out of the Labour Party for no good reason. Chris Williamson, like me, is determined that there will be life after Labour. The big question is, how much life is left in Labour? How much life is left in the left of Labour? There's nobody better to talk about those subjects with than the former Labour MP for Derby, Chris Williamson. Chris, welcome.
Good evening, George.
Nice to see you. First of all, what would be the reasons, do you think, why I would take 22%, getting on for a quarter of the Labour vote in Batley and Spen? And do you think those reasons are applicable across the country in any way?
Well, first of all, George, let me say I wish that I had been congratulating you this evening on winning the Batley and Spen by-election. I think you put in an outstanding campaign, and it was really a huge advance, I think, for the Workers' Party, even though you didn't succeed. But to achieve 22% of the poll, as you point out, was quite a remarkable achievement, given that the Workers' Party has only been in this existence, I think, for just over a year. And the Labour Party has dropped from a high under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership in 2017 in that constituency, where they've lost, I think, something in the order of 16,000 fewer votes than they achieved in 2017. And actually, over 9,000 fewer votes than they achieved in 2019, which was a disastrous outcome. And I saw an article in The Guardian, I think it was yesterday, where they refer to it as a morale-boosting victory for Keir Starmer. I think the Labour Party is in terminal decline, and you talked about the left of the Labour Party in your introductory remarks there, and I think, frankly, they have been left wanting as well. I mean, under Jeremy's leadership, there was a huge opportunity, I think, to move the Labour Party forward. There was a desire, I think, for the sort of genuine alternative that Jeremy was beginning to set out there. But unfortunately, they flunked it. There was, as we know, a Conservative smear campaign against Jeremy, obviously, but also against his supporters, his Praetorian Guard, if you like. And they were systematically removed from the party, thrown under the bus, and not a single voice was raised in opposition to that from the left of the Parliamentary Labour Party, the so-called Socialist Campaign Group, other than my own voice, actually. I was literally the only one who was prepared to speak out against the witch hunt. It was a bogus accusation that was being made that Labour was riven with anti-Semites, when the reality was that there were very, very few people who held those views inside the Labour Party. And there is no anti-Semitic crisis inside the Labour Party, nor is there one actually in the country as a whole. The Labour Party has had a long and proud record, actually, of fighting racism, but unfortunately all that was ignored, and the smears continued, and as a consequence of that, the Labour saw its keen and most effective activists being thrown out of the party, and this left then Jeremy exposed. I'm reminded of the Pastor Niemöller poem, when they said, you know, first they came for the communists and I did not speak out because I wasn't a communist, and then they came for the trade unionists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. And he goes on and finishes up by saying, then they came for me and there was nobody left to speak out for me. And that was really, I think, where Jeremy found himself in that situation when Keir Starmer suspended him. So I think the Labour Party is indeed in terminal decline, and there was an opportunity, as I say, when Jeremy became the leader, and they didn't seize that opportunity. Jeremy, I think, under his leadership, the Labour Party bucked the trend that we've seen across Europe of sort of social democratic parties actually falling into the sort of PASOKification situation, where the PASOK Social Democratic Party in Greece sort of kind of virtually disappeared from its former dominant position in the country and was replaced by other left parties. And that's being replicated elsewhere. And that trend was being bucked, I think, under Jeremy. And I think we're now seeing the same fate that has befallen other left-wing parties across Europe, who just simply haven't really moved with the times. They bought into, the problem has been, they bought into really the European project, but worse than that, they bought into the neoliberal status quo. People are desperate for an alternative to the kind of globalized neoliberal system, which has seen inequality rise exponentially. It's seen poverty on the increase. It's seen good skilled jobs being offshored to low-wage economies. This is something which has afflicted this country. And I note as well in the same article that I referenced earlier, George, where we see the likes of Rachel Reeves now, the new shadow chancellor, talking about a Buy British campaign and taking advantage of the opportunities that now are available to Britain outside the European Union, no longer subject to the state aid rules and so on. And these are the things that we should have been saying, and indeed people like me were saying actually, when Jeremy Corbyn was still the leader. But people like Rachel Reeves and Sir Keir Starmer, got onto the Remainiac bandwagon and used that really as a way of driving a further wedge, I think, between Jeremy Corbyn and the people in the country.
Well, they called us nativists for demanding. We were called nativists. And I don't think that's going to get British any better. Nationalists. I mean, to cling on to Batley and Spen by the majority, I think it was 323, to lose 16,000 votes in 3 short years is a pretty dire performance. And I think you said yourself, George, in your opening remarks, that if that performance was repeated across the country, Labour would end up with around 100 MPs. I think now what we need to be doing is regrouping those of us outside the Labour Party and building, like the Workers' Party has done, and work together to build that alternative. I think there is an appetite for that, and I think the world is our oyster now. And if we can actually work together, then I'm confident that we can build an alternative. And I think what the Workers' Party, what you demonstrated even though you didn't win, in Batley and Spen, is another alternative is possible. There is an alternative to the two-party duopoly, this political duopoly which has dominated for so long now. And it's really only an Anglosphere thing,
Yes, we need
Chris.
to go a little bit further. And you mentioned the dirty tricks that you were subjected to, and who knows, were those dirty tricks not in play, that if the outcome might have been very
quite so. But this two-party, this duopoly, Chris,
I think there is a huge hope for us now.
This duopoly is very much an Anglosphere thing. Of course, on the European continent, on the mainland of the European continent, it's normal in the Netherlands, where my wife comes from. I mean, there's a pensioners' party, there's a pet lovers' party, there's a Trotskyite party, there's a Green party, there's of every shade of social and Christian Democrat in the parliament. It's not a natural thing a two-party state. But let me ask you about inside the Labour Party. Peter Mandelson, who has been ubiquitous over the last 6 months as a Labour spokesman for Keir Starmer. I'm not sure why they've picked him, but he is. He was effectively calling for the rooting out of still more Labour Party members, implicitly including the deputy leader, Angela Rayner. Do you think that is a runner?
People voted for him in huge numbers, and why inspired so many people, that agenda inspired so many people to support the Labour Party and join the Labour Party. Were it not for the saboteurs inside the Labour Party, then I think we would have gone on and won that election. But I think the Labour Party is a lost cause, frankly. I know some people are clinging on to the hope somehow that it could be recovered, but I think they recognise that they came close, those that dominated inside the Labour Party, to what they would perceive as a disaster.
Chris,
Jeremy Corbyn had Labour government coming to power.
Yeah, Chris, it seems you can't hear me, so we'll come back to you. But let's take a call on this subject. Amar in Batley, go ahead, Amar.
How are you, George?
Good, thank you.
Right, so I was on, obviously, last night, Sky News, listening in to the ballots coming, the man on Sky News talk, and it was obviously very biased towards just the Labour Party. I did not see much mention of you whatsoever in that. I only saw Labour and Conservatives. What about George Galloway? No mention whatsoever. So I just wanted to bring that up to any of your viewers in America, Britain, wherever, that George Galloway was not mentioned in any mainstream media, which is, I think, a very, very significant point to make as to the fact that you didn't win that by-election.
Yeah, but it's especially significant because despite that, I got 22% of the vote.
Exactly. Which is why I want to bring up another point, that if you're still stuck in them old positions where it's Conservatives or Labour, I think it's time you change your mind. Because
exactly.
There's change to come.
Two cheeks.
There are new parties waiting.
Two cheeks, Amar, of the same backside. Thanks very much for that call. Here's some social media on Labour. Labour is 50 shades of woke. People are fed up with ID politics and social liberalism. And Kevin Rathbone says, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. Capitalism may, of course, bring about the end of the world, but leave that aside, Kevin. Rockstar says the picture of the piles of ballots on the tables would indicate the Tories won. And John Average says it's not who votes that matters, it's who counts the votes and controls the media. And Bushman says Labour are playing the same tricks as the dirty Democrats. And Robin Hunter says the world is one big con. Good to expose it, George. And S.C. Bath says we all know democracy is a scam. Well, as Mr. Churchill said, or to paraphrase him, democracy may be a scam, but it's the only thing we've got. And Mike Rangel says this voting stuff that went on in the UK and New York recently is out of hand. And Tour Guide said, Enoch Powell predicted that Labour would reject the working class and become a Liberal party. And David Short says, George, you know the game. You're a seasoned politician. You either got to catch up, dude, or let go. Not sure what that means, David, but you could always call the show and let us know. Chris is back on the line. We fixed that problem. Chris, I wanted to ask, Peter Mandelson, who for some reason has re-emerged from his chrysalis as the spokesman for the Labour Party, as the spokesman for Keir Starmer. He seemed to say over the last couple of days that actually there needed to be still more expulsions and rooting out of people like thee and me and people well to the right of us. including, it seemed, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, who the Times reported Starmer's allies wanted to be sacked. Do you think there's anything in this? Is there another purge coming?
Well, I don't think the purge has ever stopped, George. And actually, I was making some of those points when I was obviously just speaking into cyberspace.
No, you weren't actually. Everything you said was heard. It's just that I didn't hear it.
Oh, I see. Okay, fair enough. Okay. Well, good. I'm pleased that you heard some of my remarks, and I don't think that the purge has ever stopped, and I think it will continue. What I think New Labour are determined to do is ensure that there could be no repetition of a potential Corbyn-style leadership coming to the fore again. And they're going to do everything, in my opinion, in their power to completely crush it, to ensure that there is no prospect of it ever re-emerging. And I think a lot of people are clinging to the notion that somehow the Labour Party is recoverable, but I frankly can't see how that is possible, because they're going to change the rules to make it impossible to do that. And we know how ruthless they are. We've seen what they've done to long-standing members of the party. People have given their lives to the Labour Party, what they've done to the leader or former leader of the party, Jeremy Corbyn. And there are no depths to which they will not stoop. And when we saw that, frankly, with the sort of tactics that were deployed against you in the by-election. And they're determined, I think, to crush any semblance of a progressive socialist.
Jeremy Corbyn's never going to be readmitted, is he? Not if they're talking about sacking Angela Rayner. Why would they bring him back?
Absolutely not. I mean, Jeremy was reinstated, actually, to the Labour Party by our National Executive Committee panel who looked at it, and then he was refused the whip by the leader of the party, Sir Keir Starmer, refused to reinstate whip. So Jeremy's in this rather sort of curious position, a sort of a twilight zone as a Labour MP who's not a Labour MP. He's a member of the Labour Party, and an MP, but he's not actually a Labour MP. It's a rather curious state of affairs. And no, I mean, they're very ruthless, and seem to be operating a kind of Machiavellian approach, really, where they're determined to completely destroy what they perceive as their enemy. And sadly, I mean, had they worked together, I think we'd be talking about a Labour government now.
Yeah, quite. Now, finally, what's the meaning of Mandelson becoming the frontline big occasion spokesman for Labour now? Does that mean that the Blairites are not just operating, the strings from behind, but they're actually moving their tanks onto the front lawn?
Oh, well, I think that's absolutely the case. We've even heard of prospects of space being made for a Tony Blair comeback. I mean, I won't believe it when I see it, but no, I think it's pretty clear that that's the name of the game right now. And you don't have to be a sophisticated political analyst to recognise, who is pulling the strings right now. As we've heard, Mandelson is front and centre. Talking in I think pretty egregious terms actually about the left of the party, and frankly all the things that they accuse people like ourselves of doing, they are past masters at. It's Orwellian in its tone actually.
Orwellian indeed.
We know what we're fighting.
Yeah, Chris, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Sorry about the technical hitch earlier. Trust me, everything you said was heard. Here are the phone numbers. If you're calling from the United Kingdom, remember it's completely free to phone on 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. If you're in the United States, it's also completely free to call the show. It's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. You can email the show anytime at onair@moats.tv. And of course, you can tweet the show at George Galloway at RTUK News. Now, I think I need a quick break. Jeff Bezos formed Amazon this week in 1991. Which national newspaper does he own? A, the Washington Post, B, the New York Times, C, USA Today. Answers after the break.
The giant Labour Party sailing clearance is now on. Hurry now, as we've got zero interest in our party. It's literally the lowest it's ever been. Give up on the common man and save today. That's right, we're getting rid of all of the Corbynites. Literally every single one. Being a Blairite has never been more in style. Only available at what should be the UK's biggest political party. The new Labour Party. We're doing this again.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Is football coming home? Will England win the Euros? A, yes, 56%. B, no, 37%. C, anyone but 7%. That'll be our Scottish audience on that. Now, my good friend, Tom McGregor, is an American abroad. He's an American in China. He lives there. He has a family there. He is not a communist. That I can testify to. But he has a point of view on the achievements of the Chinese Communist Party on this, their 100th anniversary. He joins us now, no video, alas, only on audio. Tom, always welcome to the show.
Yes, it's good to talk to you again, George.
Now, Tom, is it a big deal, the 100th anniversary, or is the Chinese state, which isn't entirely what you would think of as communist these days, playing down the centenary?
No, they definitely didn't play it down. They had a lot of in Beijing, where I live and work. They had major performances. Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a major speech. There were a lot of people in Beijing to celebrate, a lot of activities all over the country. There were fireworks in many Chinese cities. It was a major deal for the Chinese to celebrate this 100th CPC anniversary.
Now, the Chinese Communist Party suffered almost unbelievable hardship in that 100 years. They fought the Japanese invader, a murderous invader, almost of unprecedented scale, a virtual Holocaust in China at the hands of the Japanese invaders. They had to fight their one-time ally, the nationalist leader, Chiang Kai-shek. They had to fight a civil war. They had to go on a very, very long march. But they triumphed in 1949. What would your report card be for the CPC at this 100th centenary?
Well, it's definitely a change party from the beginning. This idea that CPC is full-blown Marxist is not the case. What they are is socialism with Chinese characteristics, which could have many different interpretations. Deng Xiaoping and his reforms in opening up have transformed China. And I believe that for people to really understand the China of today, it's about the reform and opening up more than anything else. So you have this combination of communism, socialism, capitalism. It depends on what the interpretation is and how the government interprets the times and how to make adjustments for that. So for right now, the current adjustments that are being made is you have this scenario where there's a lot of anti-China sentiments outside the country. And now they're becoming a little bit more localized in their economy and also localized in their way of thinking, because they realize that maybe other countries are giving China a much harder time than they would like. But, you know, it's just the way it is, and they're just making adjustments to it at this moment.
I mean, politically speaking, it remains a communist country. Its flag is red. It's a one-party state. It is organized in the Marxist-Leninist style. But economically, it is open to external investment, foreign companies relocating there. It is open to capitalism. It's open for business. To capitalism. And no one's ever been this way before. Ontologically speaking, how do you characterize it?
Well, I mean, for what you just described is actually, I consider a good thing. The fact that their economy is so open is why many people are in China have become much more prosperous. And they've, like, for example, I've taken a vacation to Ningbo, and it's just beautiful area, and you see a lot of beautiful houses, and the people around are making much more money than what they had a long time ago. So these economic changes are absolutely necessary, and has really helped to make China a much better and stronger country. And I believe it's because of Deng Xiaoping and his efforts to do reform and opening up.
Of course, there were Mao Zedong had many great achievements. If not for him, there would be no modern China. The fascists would not have been defeated, the Japanese invaders. The Chiang Kai-shek nationalists would not have been supplanted. If not for Mao, great leaps forward took place under Mao, but also many disastrous turns politically. The period of the 1960s were periodic and sometimes violent. Outbursts of ultra-leftism began to hold China back. And of course, as you say, Deng Xiaoping made a very dramatic turn. Who is remembered most fondly in China nowadays, in your observation? What's the current thinking on Mao? What's the current thinking on Deng? What's the current thinking on President Xi? Is President Xi being elevated to the level of these other two? What's the pecking order?
Well, I mean, there's all these talk about Xi Jinping as this next stage of Mao or Deng. What I see instead is that yes, Xi Jinping has some popularity in China and is respected. I think what you have is a case of a lot of people are criticizing China, so the Chinese feel that they have to defend their leadership, similar to what you have seen in Russia when Putin was strongly criticized by outsiders. The Russians sort of rushed to his defense. The Chinese are a little bit similar towards Xi. So rather this label of, the Chinese don't really, they know their history. They know how China was founded, but they're very forward thinking. They would prefer to talk more about the future, the current issues of the today and tomorrow, rather than talk much about its history. They just want to move forward, and Xi Jinping is the same type of person. Of course, he does talk a lot about Marxism and all that, because that's expected of Chinese government leaders. They're supposed to talk about the history. But the overall feeling I get is that most people who are Chinese just want to focus on the now and the tomorrow.
Now, there are points of tension. The West is working on those. Hong Kong was the most egregious example, but Taiwan is another. The Uyghur question is a third. Tibet, a fourth. The Falun Gong, a fifth. The lack of democracy and so on, a sixth. Are these pressure points working? Is China firmly in control on all these fronts?
Yeah, it's not going to impact China's ability to, the CPC, the Chinese government. It will have no impact on their ability to have popularity in China as well as to continue function. Whenever it's perceived that outsiders are attacking China, the Chinese will just simply think, well, we just have to support our people even more. It's not, these forces that Biden is trying to do, that Boris Johnson is working on, and sometimes the EU follows up with whatever Washington is telling them to do against China. This stuff is really not going to work in the long term. I think what's going to happen eventually is when the UK economy, the US economy, the EU economy starts having problems, they're going to have to rush to China to get some help there. And then, they'll start changing their minds. For the time being, it looks like they feel like they don't need China economically, so they can sort of do some pushback. But the Chinese will just wait it out, and then sooner or later they'll come back to the Chinese, hoping for them to rescue their economies.
I mean, what do you think is the real reason for these cause celebres in the West? It's
jealousy.
It's
jealousy.
Jealousy.
They see China rising. They see China being successful with its economy. I see it firsthand. I mean, the fact is I came here 11 years ago. It's a major difference 11 years ago from now, just economically, standard of living alone. I've done much better. Many people who've come to China have done much better, but it's been the Chinese who've done much better most of all. So people see this and they're like, oh my gosh, how could they have done this without this democracy? That's impossible. We were always saying democracy was going to rescue everything. And it just become a shock, and it worries some of the democracy power players, and they just want to try to make China look bad because they think that if people start realizing China does succeed with the China model, then it's possible other countries might follow that. And they just don't want that.
Maybe they think China is covertly exporting its model through the Belt and Road Initiative, for example.
Okay.
Is there any, I mean, I sometimes read it in some crank publications that Chinese imperialism is a thing. Is it?
Well, there was U.S. imperialism for a long time. The people had concerns that U.S. imperialists were sending their imperialist ideals abroad, and now it's become the Chinese imperialism problem. What I've sort of had this discussion of Chinese, and sometimes they do worry about this because they go, oh my gosh, we try to help these other countries, and they're just so anti-China. And then I'm like, well, just tell them, do they want a bridge or do they not want a bridge? If it's not going to be the Chinese to build a bridge in Nigeria, who's going to build the bridge for them? Okay, so just focus on the projects, focus on the benefits of those projects, and just don't get too involved in the political debates, because you do. Most people are anti-China, and it's hard to overcome this right now.
You think they've got the biggest single market anywhere, of course, because they are the biggest population in the world. They've got plenty of capital. Their economy is growing faster again than anybody else in the world. Can they survive? How would they feel about a period, maybe a long period, maybe 10 or 20-year period, in which really basically they are building up their domestic market? They're not selling abroad in the way that they used to. They're not buying abroad in the way that they used to. Would that begin to cause some problems for the government?
Well, for some time it may cause some problems, because you have a lot of companies who are exporters who have made a lot of money by being exporters, but they'll transition. The Chinese consumer market is the largest in the world. The Chinese are becoming much more wealthier, and right now there has been a push in the government known as dual circulation, which is to increase domestic consumption, to localize the markets. So they're making adjustments, and I see, yes, there's going to be some pain points, but there's no perfect solution for every political issue or economic issue. There's going to be some pain somewhere. But I think China has been quick to figure out this anti-China thing may last longer than they expected, is a little bit stronger than they had hoped, that they had anticipated. So for the time being, they're now that we have the pandemic, they have a reason to close the borders and say, oh, we can't allow international travel. So during all this time, they can work on the localization without it becoming an issue of, oh my gosh, how come China's being left out of the foreign trade like it used to be? Well, with the pandemic, the Chinese aren't going to notice that because people are still thinking a little bit about the pandemic issues. So China is going to make its adjustments. I see it right now. Really, the economy is doing very well right now. I don't hear, sometimes you hear this, that China's economy is having problems. I haven't seen it in the past few years. Even when Trump was doing his trade wars and saying, oh my gosh, the Chinese economy crashed by 500% or whatever. That was just nonsense. It wasn't happening. China's economy is very successful. I see it. I don't know why people jump into this China is crashing. People like you and other reporters should be talking to me. I see the real China. I talk to ordinary Chinese people all the time. I'm not the guy who lives in a bubble. I live in an ordinary China world, meeting people, seeing what's going on, and if I see problems, I'd be able to spot them. But right now, the economy is doing very well in China.
Well, that's why we do talk to you, Tom McGregor.
Yeah, thank you.
In Beijing. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. If you've got a point of view on that, of course, it's welcome. The telephone number is 08081 965522, and it's entirely free. And in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344. Or you can email us, or you can tweet us. Let me tell you about the podcast. It's being listened to now all around the world. Huge numbers are downloading the, as it were, compact version of the show. Of course, in the UK and the US, but listen to these countries that downloaded it last week. Japan, India, Denmark, Saudi Arabia, Korea, Switzerland, UAE, and Hong Kong in China. All of those had significant audiences of last week's show. On China, Alexandros says, Tom does not understand what socialism and communism are. And Billy Kidman says, China capitalizes on people's misery. James Graham said, China's won its curtains for capitalism. And Stephen Cunningham says, China, state-controlled macroeconomy, string entrepreneurship with the microeconomy, unbeatable. The 21st century will be Chinese. The US is finished. And The Truth Hurts says, Mao did great leap forward because they were forced by the Russians to repay the Korean War loans or give up the land. So he tried to increase productivity to repay. So many misguided Westerners. And Andy MacDonald says, China controls capitalism. Capitalism controls the West. There is the difference. And Pat Brannigan says, unfortunately, the Western mind can only think in either or. The West cannot understand and. It is capitalism or socialism, not a blending of the likes the Chinese are doing. And John Smith says, oddly, it was Mao who protected China from the US turning it into Iraq. And Syndicate says, it's not jealousy, but a direct threat to the control the ruling class in the West have enjoyed for hundreds of years. And Chris Cox says, 73% of Chinese under 30s own their own home. The Chinese are better at capitalism than the West. Good note to end the first hour on. Let's get the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
England is to move into a period without legal restrictions where the public will have to exercise personal responsibility, including on face masks, the Housing Secretary has said. Robert Jenrick said people would come to different conclusions over face masks, but he trusted people to exercise good judgment. All legal restrictions are expected to be lifted in England on the 19th of July. The Scottish Government, however, said there would be an ongoing need for masks. A spokesperson said people could still be expected to wear face coverings on public transport and in shops even after other curbs lift in Scotland on the 9th of August. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are in charge of their own coronavirus rules, though Jenrick said that he would like a UK-wide agreement. The new leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland says the province risks losing out on economic opportunities because of the Brexit border in the Irish Sea. In his first television interview since taking up the post, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson said the Prime Minister needs to restore Northern Ireland's place in the UK, both economically and constitutionally. The Northern Ireland Protocol, agreed between the UK and the EU, established a trade border in the Irish Sea to avoid any need for a border on the island of Ireland. Donaldson is the DUP's third leader in 3 months following the ousting of Arlene Foster in May and Edward Poots, who survives just 21 days in the post. At least 31 people are dead after a military plane which was transporting troops missed a runway and crashed in the Philippines, the nation's military said. Around 40 others were rescued from the burning wreckage of the C-130 aircraft in Bangkal village in the mountainous town of Patikal in southern Sulu province. The Philippine Air Force plane had 92 people on board, including 3 pilots and 5 crew. The rest were army personnel. Government forces have been battling Abu Sayyaf militants in the predominantly Muslim Sulu province for decades. The cause of the crash was not immediately clear, but it's thought to have been due to an attack, an army spokesperson said. Several nations have sent firefighting aircraft to help Cyprus tackle a huge wildfire described by officials as the worst in the country's history. Greece, Italy and Israel have pledged help, and British troops stationed on the island are already involved. The blaze, fanned by strong winds, is spreading through the southern Limassol district and has forced the evacuation of several villages. 4 people were confirmed to have died in the fire. The victims are believed to be Egyptian farm workers, reported missing after their car was destroyed by the blaze. Local media said their bodies were found about 400 metres from their burnt-out vehicle near the village of Odos. Russia's third COVID wave is raging. On Saturday, the country reported 24,439 new cases of the virus, the highest number since January the 16th. It also hit a record high of 609 related daily deaths over the last 24 hours. It's driven by the Delta variant and is surging largely through the unvaccinated population. In Moscow alone, the death rate in a day is the same as for the whole week in the UK. In St. Petersburg, where football fans thronged on Friday to watch Switzerland play Spain, fatalities are on par with Moscow. Finnish authorities have attributed a 40% of a recent spike in cases to fans returning from watching Euro 2020 in St. Petersburg. Vaccine hesitancy is also a major problem. Only 16% of Russians have had their first jab. In the UK, it's 66%. Moscow authorities are offering prizes to get people to go to vaccination points. A fundraiser has collected more than £32,000 for a German girl who received a torrent of online abuse after she was pictured crying at Wembley as her side lost to England. The image of the supporter, who has not been identified, went viral after Germany suffered a 2-0 defeat in the second round of the Euro 2020s. Former footballer Stan Collymore later shared screen grabs showing how a minority of Twitter users had directed abuse at the young girl in reference to her nationality and Germany's Nazi past. Joel Hughes from Pontypridd, South Wales, said he decided to set up a Just Giving page with the aim of raising just £500 to show that, quote, not everyone from the UK is horrible and that we care. However, after just 4 days online, the page had raised £32,667 in donations from people who wanted to show their support. And finally, a woman in Atlanta woke up to a surprise cat that wasn't hers jumped onto a bed. She was shocked to discover that the cat was a wild one, which is an exotic cat native to Africa. Christine Frank, who lives in the Brookhaven neighbourhood, said the cat came into her house shortly after her husband took their dog outside, leaving a door open. The cat was just 6 inches from her face. However, Frank said she managed to scare it off the bed. The cat is still loose, however, and Frank thinks the serval, which she estimated to be about 2.5 feet tall, is someone's lost pet. And that's the latest Sputnik News. I know.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Well, we're taking your calls on all the subjects on the order paper this evening. If you're in the UK, it's 08081 965522. If you're in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344. In both cases, the calls are entirely free. Now, when I think of all the decades, best years of my life really, that I spent fighting for the Palestinian cause, the performance of the government, as they call themselves, in Ramallah since the killing of President Arafat has been a grave disappointment. Imagine what it must be like if you're a Palestinian. Our next guest is a man that I have been campaigning alongside since we were both kings, since we were both young men. He's still a king, the last Arab, sometimes think the only Arab, journalist and writer, certainly the biggest and the best followed. He is Abdel Bari Atwan, and he joins me now. Abdel Bari, greetings to you. Let's start, if we may, with the miserable, melancholic, filthy killing of a Palestinian journalist, not by Israel, but by the Palestinian security forces. Tell us about Nizar and what happened to him, please.
George, it is a pleasure to be with you again. Yes, we were fighting together. Yes, you are well loved in the Middle East because you always stand with the right causes there. What happened on the West Bank, what happened actually in Hebron was extremely devastating. It was actually humiliating to the Palestinian cause. The men of Mahmoud Abbas, the so-called the president of the Palestinian Authority, those security men stormed the house of Nizar Banat, who is activist, who the one believes in the right of the Palestinian for return of their land, for the return to their land also. So they actually stormed his house 3 o'clock in the morning and took him to a very obscure place. They beat them to death actually by iron, roads, and it was devastating. The man was killed. The man actually, his brain or his head actually was broken because of the torture. So the Palestinians now are really so angry, so asking for Abbas to step down. He is not accepted anymore as a president of the Palestinian people. He is coordinating with the Israeli forces in order against the Palestinian. It was a president. We never seen a liberation organization actually collaborating with the occupiers against their own people. So I believe Abbas days are extremely numbered, and there are demonstrations in most of the Palestinian cities now calling for his actually step down. He is not acceptable.
He's been there for far, far too long. You and I both knew him when he was a young man. He was at Arafat's side. He was a technocrat at Arafat's side, but he was never a leader. How has he managed to stay in power so long without election and without any kind of leadership quality at all?
The magic word, George, is Israeli and the American. The Israeli are actually protecting him. They are giving him the authority, and he coordinating security-wise with them. The American are giving him the money. So the Israeli protection, the American money actually brought him to power and kept him on power and imposed him on the Palestinian people. This man actually, he is against any kind of resistance to the occupation, the Israeli occupation. Actually, he is protecting the Israeli settlers by his about 40,000 of his security forces. So he is there because the American want him there. He is there because the Israeli want him there. He is there because, the Palestinian people don't want him at all. That's the reason. This is the magic word. Unfortunately, this man, I believe, imposed on the Palestinian people. There are, a hidden hands who put him in power, even during Arafat time. They imposed him on Arafat in order to be a prime minister first, and then to topple Arafat. Arafat was poisoned, and there are a lot of actually fingers pointing to the Israeli being behind his putting poison in his body, some sort of, razor or some sort of, very, very, very sophisticated poison.
The demonstrations you talk of are demanding that he step down. First of all, what's the chance that he will? And secondly, what would happen if he did?
George, this man actually is buying time. He is in Haiti in his 85 years of age now. And he is, sort of all kind of, illness is actually affecting him now. He is suffering from a lot of illness, to be honest. So he is trying to stay in power as long as he can. Whether he will stay, I personally, I doubt it. There is, 80% or 85% of the Palestinians, they don't want him to be in power. But as I said, the American want him. The Israeli want him. This is the problem. But at the end, I believe, the Arab Spring removed a lot of dictators, and I believe Abbas, who actually cancelled the election in order to stay in power, he knew that if any sort of legislative election, it will depose him completely and his authority. So he cancelled it. But I believe now the Palestinian people will never accept him again in power. He must leave. And all the entourage around him, corrupt entourage also, must leave. The Palestinian people cannot actually accept this, especially after they resist the Israeli attacks on Gaza. After they prove that they can defend themselves, and the resistance is the only way actually to solve the Palestinian problem, to regain the Palestinian rights.
Now, he is the leader not just of the authority, but of the PLO and the party which dominates the PLO, which I always supported, and I think you, although you never support any party, were not unsympathetic to Fatah. He's the leader of all of these things. Is there any new people, any new leadership coming through?
George, this man is the president of the Palestinian Army, the president of the PLO, the president of Fatah, the president of authority. He's president of everything. He has at least 6 or 7 major jobs between his hands. So he actually consolidated all the power and he put all the power between his hands. And he has entourage who actually say yes men. All of them agree with him simply because he got the security forces, about 40,000, and they are actually carry out any orders from him. And also he has the money. Fatah, unfortunately, actually, which was actually a leading Palestinian liberation organization, and they gave a lot of martyrs for the actually to help to solve, to regain the Palestinian rights. It is now in a disarray. Now we have 3 Fatah, not just one. Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas, Fatah Marwan al-Barghouthi, the prisoner in the Israeli jails. He is a very nationalistic and he is the Mandela of Palestine. And then Fatah Muhammad Dahlan. So Abbas realized that his Fatah is fragmented. Fatah cannot actually lead the Palestinian people, cannot be the leader of got the majority on the PLO. So that's why actually he is now trying to freeze every Palestinian action. But the people in Palestine saying enough is enough. We cannot actually accept this man to decide our future. We want to go back to the resistance, all type of resistance against the Israeli, against the settler. But Israel should actually pay a heavy price for its occupation of the Palestinian land.
Now, Mandela did quite well as the leader behind bars of the African National Congress. Why don't they go for Marwan Barghouti, who seems to me the only leader amongst them?
Yes, George. Now, Marwan Barghouti is very, very popular. And actually, when he decided to set up some sort of a party to represent him on the legislative election, Abbas realized that he is in danger, Abbas in danger, Fatah in danger. So he decided actually to cancel the election. Now Marwan Barghouti is gaining ground. The problem is he is in prison. Hamas, as I knew that, when they talked with the Israeli about prisoner exchange, actually his name was the top of Hamas list. So if actually this kind of prisoner exchange deal is going to work, Barghouti will be released, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does exactly what Mandela did for South Africa. So let us pray for him to be released. He is a very honest man. He is a very clean man, and he is very nationalistic, and he is also the type of Arafat leadership, maybe more actually enlightened than Arafat. So if Marwan Barghouti released, I think he will reunify the Palestinian people behind him, and the Israeli will find themselves under a huge pressure to listen to the international community, to carry out the international legalization resolutions. So this is the only way. So I believe Marwan al-Barghouti could be actually the dark horse who will change the whole scene on the Palestinian cause of the Palestinian territories.
Finally, just a personal reflection, Abdel Bari. In the 1970s, you and I together were talking about the fight for a secular democratic state which would be so different from the Arab dictatorships all around. It ended up in the form of Abbas and this authority, just as dirty as any Arab dictatorship anywhere else, didn't it?
Yeah, you are absolutely right, George. We all actually fought and struggled for actually an independent, secular, democratic Palestinian state for everybody, for the Jews, for the Christian, for the Muslims, for the Arabs, for everybody in Palestine to live together, coexist with each other. And unfortunately, the West, which they claim that they are secular and they are democratic, was against this kind of formula. So they convinced Arafat, the division of Palestine, to have a Palestinian state, independent state, and 20% only of historic Palestine. This is the only work which will work, actually, the only formula which will work. So Arafat accepted because he has nothing, and the West put a huge pressure on him. So he changed the formula of independent, democratic, secular state to a little state on the West Bank and Gaza. What happened, actually? The Israeli took that 80%, and then, again, took about 30% of the West Bank. So nothing left for the Palestinians. And they settled more than 800,000 settlers on the West Bank. Nothing left for the Palestinians to establish their own state, independent state. Now, I think we are back again. The Palestinians will never accept the two-state solution because there is no land to build to establish a state on this. So what is happening now? One-state solution is the most acceptable solution among the Palestinian people. Now we are back again, George. All of us, and you are one of us, to reach this dream, to achieve this dream, to have one-state solution, like what happened in South Africa, live together, Muslim, Christian, Jews, in equal footing, and give a good example of equality to the international community, to everybody in the world. We are not actually racist. We don't want actually to deprive the Jews who were in Palestine before Israel was established, and even we can talk and reach a solution or a formula for everybody. But one-state solution, all the Palestinians, to live together with the Israeli, with the Jews, with the Christian, with everybody in Palestine. This is, I believe, the most acceptable solution. But we have to remember that the Israeli, they passed a law saying, so-called national law, to make Palestine only for the Jews. And the Palestinian should have nothing at all. Should be a citizen or 10th class citizen, even not a second-class citizen. This is the obstacle in front of the peace of secular democratic state solution.
Abdel Bari Atwan, always a pleasure to talk to you, even on unhappy occasions like this one. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, let me give you my next question. In 1348, I remember it well, Pope Clement declared in a papal bull, who or what was not responsible for the plague, the Black Death? A, rats, B, Satan, C, Jews. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo. And get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Pizza Express Woking. What is it you want? Oh, you want an ill-advised interview on the BBC? A cheese pizza, extra immature, and a raw bailout. No, we don't take taxpayers' money. Yeah, but we do take contactless. Would you like a receipt for that, Mr. Prince?
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
In 1348, Pope Clement declared in a papal bull that Jews were not responsible for the Black Death. I mention it just to give a metric by which one can measure for how long and how foul and how vile European Christian anti-Semitism has been and continues to be. That's almost a millennia ago. It's 800 years ago. People were blaming the Black Death on Jews. Pogroms were taking place against Jews throughout that millennium. And of course, in the Holocaust, with a capital H, an attempt was made industrially to annihilate, to wipe from the face of the earth every single Jew on the planet, at least any that the fascists could get their hands on. I tweeted earlier this evening a 2-year-old baby murdered in a gas chamber in 1944 by Hitler fascism. So let no one be in any doubt. Anti-Semitism is a real thing and has been one of the most long-running, poisonous, murderous, genocidal racisms on the planet. Is football coming home? Will England win the Euros? Seems stuck on 57%. Over 1,000 people have voted now. 57% say yes, 35% say no, and the Scottish vote has gone up 1 to 8%. You've got time to still to affect that balance. I've got some calls. Let's take Mohammed in Manchester. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Good evening, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good.
Alhamdulillah. It was good to hear. It's good to hear, George.
Thank you.
Yeah, George, I was tuning in today, and I heard at the beginning of the show you were asking if China has the best system in the world.
Yeah.
One of my issues with China is the Uyghur genocide, so the Islamophobic oppression and crimes against humanity against the Uyghurs. So that's a straightaway red flag for me. I know they're part of the UN, so, you know, obviously, in Islam, we know that if you see an evil, you should try and change it with your hand. If you can't change it with your hand, your hands are tied. Speak out against it, so change it with your tongue. If you can't speak out against it, then the least you can do is try and change it with your heart, and that's the weakest of faith. So I'm just, you know, my position of calling today is really just to try and have any impact on, you know, being against oppression and injustice and trying to change it, George. You've got a lot of experience in politics. Surely, George, you would have an answer as to how we could have a conversation which could leverage that slightly even.
Well, I do have conversations with China on this subject at all levels. But first I need you to justify your claim that there is a genocide against Uyghurs. You mean there's a systematic attempt to murder them all?
Oppression isn't just murder, George. I don't want to go into the brutalities of all the oppression that's going on. If you go on YouTube, the very first video that shows up when you type in Uyghurs is actually from The Economist. But
well, that'll be the Holy Grail then, Mohammed, if it's in The Economist. You see, this is the problem. I think that people who think like you are relying on the very sources that told you Saddam Hussein was feeding people into human shredders and had weapons of mass destruction under his bed. I'm willing to bet you didn't believe that propaganda. Why are you believing this propaganda from the same sources?
I've actually been to China, George, and they were accommodating for group of Muslims, including myself, to go and pray in areas. And in the area that I went to in China, near Hong Kong, they were very accommodating, and I can't fault them in anything done towards me personally. But these people, these Uyghurs, or if we were to look across the world, it's not just in China. This oppression goes on for God knows what reason. If it's financial, for satanistic reasons. I'm going to speak my mind, George. I'm not going to hold back. There's corruption in the world. You know this, George, and I'm not going to compromise my hereafter at the expense of buying this life. And that's what some people are doing. And China is part of the UN, and the other countries are silent about this.
You're rather avoiding my question. What is your definition of this genocide that you say is taking place against the Uyghurs? You've already conceded implicitly that they're not actually trying to murder them. So what do you mean?
Strip them of Islam, of their Islamic identity, by detaining them and trying to brainwash them, kidnapping children from their parents and detaining them.
And what's your source? What's your source of those allegations?
The same source that you have, George. I remember you getting on a ship and going to see it yourself.
I have been to see it myself. That was a very foolish. That's a very foolish assumption of yours. I told you that I discuss this question with China often. Now we've agreed that they're not being killed. In fact, their population is greatly increasing. In fact, they are permitted to have 3 children, whilst Han families are allowed to have only 2 children. You're not going to pretend that there are not more mosques in one province of Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs live, than there is in the entire United States of America. You're not going to pretend that there are not more Muslims in China than there are people in the European Union. So where are you getting this genocide word from?
George, in China, in Yemen, in Syria, in Palestine, are you telling me people are not being sacrificed, satanistically trying to be slipped of their Islamic identity?
That's twice you've used the word satanistically. That makes me nervous, nervous. What are you trying to say?
They're trying to strip people of their Islamic identity.
We've already agreed, I think, and you were praying in one, that there are more mosques in China than almost anywhere else in the world. How is that stripping people of their Islamic identity?
Because it's not sacrificing one group of people and calling it reform to justify it, to give luxuries of built mosques for others and justifying it as reform.
Well,
you could argue
a very strange form of genocide that boosts the population of Muslims, builds record numbers of mosques for them to pray in, and yet still be accused of stripping them of their Islamic identity. Here's the problem, Mohammed, and I would have thought it was better for you to be frank about this. The only people in prison in Xinjiang amongst the Uyghurs are those that are attached to the Al-Qaeda affiliate, the East Turkestan Liberation Organization. Now, every country fights Al-Qaeda, and so they should, shouldn't they?
George, this is the same problem which is going on in Yemen and in Syria and in Palestine.
Why do you keep changing the subject?
Because
is there Al-Qaeda? Is there Al-Qaeda? I'm happy to talk about all these other things.
Don't associate me with names. I don't know who Al-Qaeda is, so don't associate me with a name.
You don't know who? You don't know. You are Mohammed in Manchester, and you don't know who Al-Qaeda is.
Yes, why are you putting my name, or why are you connecting with them in any way? I haven't brought up Al-Qaeda, so why have you brought them up?
I've brought it up because that's who the Chinese state is fighting. And
you're saying the Chinese state is not corrupt? Are you saying the Chinese...
Every state is fighting.
Yeah, it's a corrupt world, George. It's a corrupt world. You know it's a corrupt world.
You're slightly, how shall I put it, confused man, Mohammed. I think we've taken this far enough. Let's go to Michael in Sydney. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, hi, George. I'd like to talk about two things, basically. First, I'd like to respond to Mohammed and back you up there, George. There's actually more mosques in Xinjiang per head of population for Muslims than there is anywhere else in Earth.
Including Saudi Arabia.
Including Saudi Arabia. In Syria, a large from over there is the 10,000 Turkmenistan Uyghur terrorists currently in...
from nearby China. They're in Syria. I wonder how they got there. Michael.
Through Turkey, through Afghanistan, probably airlifted into Turkey by the US. But anyway, it's a different story. Not a lot of people know that China actually borders Afghanistan, but it does. It has a small border with them and a large border with Pakistan. But also the fact that 34 Muslim countries signed a letter not long ago actually saying they would prefer the way China deals with terrorism to the way the US deals with it. And recently in the UN, there was a resolution to try to condemn China and say they were committing genocide in Xinjiang. And many Muslim countries voted with China against the resolution.
Yeah, of course, Prime Minister Imran Khan of Pakistan just last week denounced these foolish, wild accusations of genocide. We now discover what genocide, we discover from Mohammed eventually, after pressing him, what they mean by genocide. It's not killing, it's not suppressing the population, it's increasing the population and increasing the number of mosques and Islamic institutions. That's the strangest kind of genocide I've ever heard of.
Yeah, it is, George. It is, and it's just like used as a cudgel by the US to basically try to cast dispersions on the great progress made by China over the last 100 years. And like you said, there have been some hiccups. But I'd also like to report about the sort of things. I mean, the misreporting of Xi Jinping's speech. I thought your guest from CCTV would have brought it up before. On CGTN, which is the English state media they put out through YouTube, I watched Xi Jinping's speech live, and the interpreter, the English interpreter, actually said not that we will bloody their head by bashing it against a steel wall. He actually said they will run up against a steel wall forged by 1.4 billion Chinese in fire. And secondly, in regards to Tiananmen Square, recently in Australia, it came out on the ABC probably about 3 weeks ago, that the propaganda about tanks running over people in Tiananmen Square wasn't actually true. There were some people shot, but there weren't people run over by tanks. And it was reported on the ABC. It was all propaganda put out through the CIA and other Western sources, and it's actually a total load of baloney. It never actually happened. No one was run over by any tanks in Tiananmen Square.
There was a mass demonstration of students in Tiananmen Square. It was dispersed with force. They say that some people were killed, though I've never seen any pictures of dead people from Tiananmen Square, which doesn't mean they weren't killed. But the numbers were small by comparison with, say, the Kent State University shootings of students in America rising up against the Vietnam War, or perhaps more apt, the shootings of Palestinians that occur on a regular basis. I'm against the shooting of people anywhere at any time. I think that China did not have to use live ammunition in Tiananmen Square. I think that the situation amongst Uyghurs, where there is an Al-Qaeda affiliate active, recruiting people, conducting acts of terrorism, has to be handled better by the Chinese authorities. I've given this to China, the example of internment in Northern Ireland, which was an attempt by the British to clamp down on republicanism in Northern Ireland, and ended up vastly increasing the numbers of Republicans in Northern Ireland and educating them in revolutionary techniques in the internment camps. So I'm not an apologist for China in the sense that I think China has made many mistakes in its history and may still be making some of them now. But what I won't accept is a US-led attempt to slander China for the purposes of breaking it up, slowing it down, weakening it, making it less of a competitor to the US. And I'm sorry that so many people have fallen for this kind of propaganda offensive, coming from people who don't give a toss about suffering of Muslims in Yemen or in Afghanistan or in Libya or in Palestine or in Iraq or in Kashmir or anywhere else in the world, but are apparently deeply concerned about Muslims in China. Go figure. Thanks for that call. Let's go to John in Dorset. Go ahead, John.
Hello, George. Just to change the subject, if I may. Just to bring up a small incident that occurred recently up in Batley. Was it a grammar school or a secondary school up there?
You mean the teacher in the grammar school, yeah?
Yeah, just a teacher up there. I mean, just between you and me, what would you advise that teacher to do?
Just between you, me, and the world.
You and I. You and I.
Well,
what would you advise him to do?
If I had been elected as the Member of Parliament, I would have walked him back into the school. But I don't know what will happen now that I am not the Member of Parliament. He's been badly let down. He's been badly let down by the Labour authority that employs him, by the Labour MP as was, now the Mayor of West Yorkshire, by the local Labour political class. They ran away and abandoned him. They forfeited all leadership of the public's response to allegations which turn out not even to have been accurate. This man has been given very difficult cards to handle by the authority that employed him, the head teacher that was his line manager, and by the local political class. If I had been the MP, I would have resolved it very quickly. With a question to the Prime Minister on Wednesday to meet, asking for a meeting with the Prime Minister about it, I would have laid out my plan for resolving it, and I believe that it would have worked, and I would have walked in to the school with him. John, last word to you.
Well, it was just, I totally agree with your sophisticated way of resolving quite a life and death situation. But I do think that by marching that poor bloke back into a school, I think that would inflame it, to be honest.
Not if it was me that was marching him in. No, it wouldn't.
Well, I just think it's an ongoing situation. I mean, I can remember Salman Rushdie. I can remember a bloke called Cat Stevens. I used to buy his records. And the bloke came out on the TV and he said that he firmly believes that the bloke should be wiped out. I mean, I'm not imagining
Cat Stevens is a very gentle person. I cannot imagine him saying those words.
Take it from me. I can assure you, I mean, I don't know him personally, but I can assure you that...
I do know him personally, and I can't imagine
ask him.
That he... well, I will. Okay, John.
Tell him I like his music, but keep off the politics.
All right, John. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. In 1957, John Lennon and Paul McCartney first met. Where was it? A, at school. B, at a church fete. C, in the park. Answers after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Hey you, do you want to know more of what's happening in the world right now? Of course you do. But getting to the heart of the story? Well, that's going to take some hard work. That's why here at the Mother of All Talk Shows, we've created that program just for you, hosted by one of the world's most sagacious minds. get a perspective, an education on stories from all around the world, dissected and discussed with you. Join our debate, vote in our polls on Twitter, tweet a question to George, or call in now to give us your perspective on the stories the rest of the world simply isn't talking about. Join the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees, hosted by one of the world's greatest orators, the mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. Let's make sense of the world together.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Lennon and McCartney met in 1957 at a church fete. The luckiest, most fortuitous church fete. What a tombola prize that was. The meeting of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Now, 5 minutes left on the poll. Is football coming home? Will England win the Euros? Yes, 56%. No, 37%. Anyone but 7%. 1,123 of you have voted on my Twitter feed. You've got 5 minutes to get your say in. Now, are there any calls? I should take Vince in New Mexico next, I think. Vince, welcome. Hello, Vince.
Hi.
Welcome. Go ahead. Wish I was in New Mexico. I think we've lost
Corporation's news reports of your election in Batley and Spen. I noticed they can't speak of you without adding the adjective divisive, and that's in one of their kinder news reports. They usually say even worse about you.
Yeah. Divisive in the way that the party that killed 1 million people in Iraq could never be so described. What they mean by divisive, Victor, in Greenwich, is I'm standing against them, I'm opposing them, but more than opposing them, I'm exposing them. I'm exposing them for all the people that they killed, for all the crimes they committed, for all the betrayals they carried out, for all the broken hearts that they have left amongst the working people in this country when they were supposed to be representing them. That's what they mean by divisive, Victor.
Indeed, George, we both know that. And I also noticed that they allowed the Blairite Party candidates to slag you off on their broadcasts. I never once saw you have a chance to write a reply. Shouldn't the BBC's transmissions be declared as an election expense by the Blairite candidate?
That's a very
representation of the People's Act.
That's a very shrewd observation. I no longer am interested in what the fake news media say. I'm talking over their heads to a much bigger audience than they can muster. I'm doing so 7 days a week and all day of every day of the week. I'm doing it on Facebook, on Twitter, on RT, on Sputnik, on Moats. I'm doing it on RT America. I'm reaching millions of people when they are reaching thousands of people. I don't care what they say about me. Of course, if they break the law, then I'll punish them in the courts. But short of that, I'm no longer interested, Vic. Thanks very much for that call. Bobby is in London on China. Go ahead, Bobby.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. It was lovely to hear your voice, and thank you for taking my call.
Welcome.
Let me say something very quick. I agree 100% with Mr. Atwan about Abbas need to go. And also, I disagree with Mohammed from Manchester that the Chinese Muslim, they are extremely respected. They have freedom of prayer, They are the people who are deprived from the Muslim in France. They don't have freedom. The Muslim in Germany, they don't have freedom. The Muslim in United States of America and other Eastern European countries, they don't have freedom whatsoever. But in China, they have total freedom without no hassle whatsoever. Anyhow, this is the point I want to... The other point about the Chinese Communist Party, you don't need to be liberal to be democratic. China is a democratic country. China, Republic of China, Mr. Galloway, is now a high power politically, militarily, economically, and financially. And I say to the United States of America and to the Western country, the train has left you by millions of miles. You will never catch China whatsoever. Before I finish, Mr. Galloway, I'm talking about the election in Spain. I am 100%. You have won the election. You have won it. And I am extremely happy that you are going to take a legal action. And you're going to win. The returning officer should make the recount.
Yeah, it was a very unreasonable decision that she made. And by unreasonable, I mean had no reason. No reason was given. The law is very clear that when the margin is less than 1%, there should be a recount. That's the law. And so no reason was given for not implementing the law. And that's only the tip of the iceberg, Bobby. There's much, much more beneath. Thank you very much for your lovely call. John is in Ontario on change of subject, the climate. Go ahead, John.
Hi, George. How are you doing? A real pleasure to talk to you today.
And you, sir.
Hey, George. The climate's obviously a big problem. I'm in Canada, so my prediction for this year, which was my prediction for last year and the same year before, but this year it really looks like things are going to explode. And by that I mean catch on fire and burn. I'm not a scientist. I'm not especially smart, but the obvious conclusions that our scientists have been telling us for quite a long time is that this is what's going to happen. The leaders that we have all done lip service to it. Everybody seems to be at least aware that it might be a problem, yet to this day I still find people that think that everything is fine and this is a natural program, and the main consideration is money. In any other circumstances, whether it be financial or property ownership or, well, any number of them, that would be just criminal behavior. At what point is it going to become criminal behavior, do you think?
Well, look, John, it's quite clear that the Earth is currently warming. The Arctic temperature today was the highest it's ever been. I think it was 18 degrees. Question is, what's causing that? Is it human activity, or is it like the rise and fall of temperatures in the world long before there was industrial activity in the world? And the second question is, are the efforts that we're currently making, which are, of course, quite considerable. I mean, green is the new gold. Everyone's dashing for green. It is a new form of capitalism. Is that going to bring this rise in temperatures under control? I've got my doubts about that, John. Last word to you.
Well, the Green Initiative is definitely financially driven. The the dollars are not going to put out those fires. So, on that note, though, George, I do agree. A lot of people say that billionaires are the cause, but at the same time, with the course that we're on, billionaires are the only ones that can save us. They're the only ones that are going to be able to redirect this avalanche of money that we have created in a very recent time to combat this change. And I hope that people keep on the mission and keep progressing that. The step one, no question about it, stop burning anything at 100 billion barrels a day. That's step one. If we can achieve that, I believe that we can capture carbon or do whatever, but the world really needs to get ready. There's no question in the rest of the world. It's in the first world countries that there seems to be any kind of reticence to aggressively tackle this problem, George.
Thank you, John. Got to go a little south of you to Basant in New York. Go ahead, Basant.
Hi, George. It's great to be on. And I totally agree with you that talk of genocide in Xinjiang is hysterical and it's propaganda, and the BBC is really going crazy about it. But on the other hand, I don't really trust what the Global Times, also state media, has to say about Xinjiang either. So I think the way for us to solve this problem is for China to allow unfettered access to journalists from all over the world. So people from outside and inside can can make up their own minds based on real information. Right now we have no information.
I suppose what happened to Iraq might be in the minds of the Chinese authority. Iraq, of course.
China is no Iraq. China is this huge superpower. It's not going to be dismantled by a few journalists.
No. Unfettered access for Western propagandists to come
not just the West, Latin America, African journalists, Indian journalists.
I dare say that there is access
Taiwanese
for journalists. There's access for me. There might be access for you. I don't know if you've tried. We heard even from the man in Manchester earlier that he had been looked after splendidly on his mission to see the lives of Muslims in China. But unfettered access for the New York Times and the Washington Post, I kind of doubt that, Basant. I'm not sure if I was running China, I'd be queuing up for that. Last word to you.
Well, just thanks for your show. I love your show. I watch it every weekend.
Thank you very much, my friend. Very nice to hear that. On Palestine, Viriathos says, and this then begs the question, if Abbas goes away, who will his replacement be? Will his replacement be yet another American puppet? Well, not if it's Marwan Barghouti. Thomas McGuire says, what a great journalist Atwan is. For years, his insightful analysis and commentary on the Middle East has been of the highest quality. And Barbara Brown says, young Palestinians can talk to the world now. They have access to the internet, so change is coming. And Ima says, Palestinians are Semitic. Guess who that makes the most anti-Semitic people on earth? And China, Stephen Davis says, evidence of Uyghur Muslim genocide comes from very dubious sources. And Damien says, genocide, Uyghurs are the only demographic that's growing in China. And Bari says, George is blind concerning China. I wonder how he would like to be put up in a re-education camp. Frankly, Barry, after the week I've had. Starman says, I thought communism didn't believe in religion, and I'm surprised you could still practice it in such a controlled place as China. Well, just goes to show, Starman, don't believe all of your prejudices. And on Labour, David Rayner says, Labour now hates the working class. I'm afraid that is indubitably true. Ali Hussein says, Tony Blair was the best Labour Prime Minister and you guys ran him out. He helped to liberate Iraq from Saddam, prevented Iraq from being a terrorist HQ with tons of oil and cash to hand out to thugs and killers. Ali, make my day, won't you? Give me a call on 08081 96 5522. Please, Ali, please, please, please. And Robbie the Pict says the working class in England hate themselves, to be honest. They've been divided for years by Murdoch. I see no sign of that in the wave of euphoria in England about the Euros. Are you sure, Robbie the Pict? This is not green cheese. And Dibla says Batley and Spen is a town in the land that time forgot. And Shaker says, please stop the post-mortem, George. With respect, you're starting to sound and behave like Donald Trump. Well, thanks for watching anyway, Shaker. And Andy Wilkins says Starmer isn't right-wing. He's right off Corbyn, but only just. And Barbara Brown says, if I didn't know George, I would think him a really bad man. Too many lies now. Enough. Thank you, Barbara. And Felix says, George has a heart of a lion. We could use him as an energetic MP in Botswana. I might take that option up, Felix, if there's a good by-election coming up. There's a poll for the last hour. What was Jeffrey Epstein's nickname for his friend Peter Mandelson? A, my sweet lord. B, Baron. C, PT. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. But first, the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
England is to move into a period without legal restrictions where the public will have to exercise personal responsibility, including on face masks, the Housing Secretary has said. Robert Jenrick said people would come to different conclusions over face masks, but he trusted people to exercise good judgment. All legal restrictions are expected to be lifted in England on the 19th of July. The Scottish Government, however, said there would be an ongoing need for masks. A spokesperson said people could still be expected to wear face coverings on public transport and in shops even after other curbs lift in Scotland on the 9th of August. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are in charge of their own coronavirus rules, though Jenrick said that he would like a UK-wide agreement. The new leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland says the province risks losing out on economic opportunities because of the Brexit border in the Irish Sea. In his first television interview since taking up the post, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson said the Prime Minister needs to restore Northern Ireland's place in the UK, both economically and constitutionally. The Northern Ireland Protocol, agreed between the UK and the EU, established a trade border in the Irish Sea to avoid any need for a border on the island of Ireland. Donaldson is the DUP's third leader in 3 months following the ousting of Arlene Foster in May and Edward Poots, who survives just 21 days in the post. At least 31 people are dead after a military plane which was transporting troops missed a runway and crashed in the Philippines, the nation's military said. Around 40 others were rescued from the burning wreckage of the C-130 aircraft in Bangkal village in the mountainous town of Patikal in southern Sulu province. The Philippine Air Force plane had 92 people on board, including 3 pilots and 5 crew. The rest were army personnel. Government forces have been battling Abu Sayyaf militants in the predominantly Muslim Sulu province for decades. The cause of the crash was not immediately clear, but it's thought to have been due to an attack, an army spokesperson said. Several nations have sent firefighting aircraft to help Cyprus tackle a huge wildfire described by officials as the worst in the country's history. Greece, Italy and Israel have pledged help, and British troops stationed on the island are already involved. The blaze, fanned by strong winds, is spreading through the southern Limassol district and has forced the evacuation of several villages. 4 people were confirmed to have died in the fire. The victims are believed to be Egyptian farm workers, reported missing after their car was destroyed by the blaze. Local media said their bodies were found about 400 metres from their burnt-out vehicle near the village of Odos. Russia's third COVID wave is raging. On Saturday, the country reported 24,439 new cases of the virus, the highest number since January the 16th. It also hit a record high of 609 related daily deaths over the last 24 hours. It's driven by the Delta variant and is surging largely through the unvaccinated population. In Moscow alone, the death rate in a day is the same as for the whole week in the UK. In St. Petersburg, where football fans thronged on Friday to watch Switzerland play Spain, fatalities are on par with Moscow. Finnish authorities have attributed a 40% of a recent spike in cases to fans returning from watching Euro 2020 in St. Petersburg. Vaccine hesitancy is also a major problem. Only 16% of Russians have had their first jab. In the UK, it's 66%. Moscow authorities are offering prizes to get people to go to vaccination points. A fundraiser has collected more than £32,000 for a German girl who received a torrent of online abuse after she was pictured crying at Wembley as her side lost to England. The image of the supporter, who has not been identified, went viral after Germany suffered a 2-0 defeat in the second round of the Euro 2020s. Former footballer Stan Collymore later shared screen grabs showing how a minority of Twitter users had directed abuse at the young girl in reference to her nationality and Germany's Nazi past. Joel Hughes from Pontypridd, South Wales, said he decided to set up a Just Giving page with the aim of raising just £500 to show that, quote, not everyone from the UK is horrible and that we care. However, after just 4 days online, the page had raised £32,667 in donations from people who wanted to show their support. And finally, in Atwan, woke up to a surprise when a cat, hers, jumped out of bed on Wednesday morning. She was even more to discover that the cat was a Serb, which is an exotic cat native to Africa. Christine Frank, who lives in the Brookhaven neighbourhood, said the cat came into her house shortly after her husband took their dog outside, leaving a door open. The cat was just 6 inches from her face. However, Frank said she managed to scare it off the bed. The cat is still loose, however, and Frank thinks the serval, which she estimated to be about 2.5 feet tall, is someone's lost pet. And that's the latest on I'm
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Final hour, lots of calls. Get your calls in, you know the numbers. The poll, what was Jeffrey Epstein's nickname for his friend Peter Mandelson? Let me run that past you again. Jeffrey Epstein, the paedophilic child molesting sex trafficker, what was his nickname for his friend, Keir Starmer's spokesman, Lord Peter Mandelson? Was it A, My Sweet Lord, B, Baron, C, Petey? You can vote on my Twitter feed. Now, not necessarily on Jeffrey Epstein, though it may come up. Who knows? Ghislaine Maxwell's still in the jug and on trial. But for a roundup of what's the big stories in America, it's my RT America colleague, Caleb Maupin. Caleb, welcome back to the show. Always a delight to see you. What's rattling in the US of A?
Well, it's summertime, and we have some rather erratic weather that goes along with our erratic economy. Unemployment is certainly a problem. They're giving us good job numbers, but if you look out at the streets of New York City, there's a lot of desperation. Things are starting to open up. The pandemic seems like it's moving on, but Americans are hungry. Americans are homeless. Americans are frustrated, and they are angry. At the same time, there was fears here in New York City that our power grid might explode. We all received notifications last week urging us not to use the electricity, a fear that what happened in Texas in the winter when the power grid just went out and left people in the cold, a fear that we might have the opposite problem here in New York and lose power and have everyone, boiling in the heat. The infrastructure of the United States is certainly in a state of decay. Joe Biden says he wants to do something about it. Meanwhile, we have Bill Cosby. He's out of jail. He's no longer locked up. The issue being prosecutorial misconduct. People are wondering about Kamala Harris and what she's planning to do about the border crisis. Many, many different situations here in the country, but a lot of frustration.
Now, let's talk about the Cosby thing. By the way, the BBC, true to their recent form, had a reporter outside the jail as Bill Cosby was coming out, but unfortunately, she referred to the prisoner coming out through the door as Bill Clinton. Is this a major setback for those that celebrated the incarceration of a man that many of us grew up with and loved and respected? Or is the prosecutorial misconduct so egregious that the court had no choice but to release him?
Well, the thing is that, we know Bill Cosby largely is guilty of the crimes for which he was charged. But the issue is that when the prosecutors interviewed him, a deal was made that he would make incriminating statements and he would give them information which could be used against him in court in the understanding that he would not be charged. He was going to give them a deposition for a potential civil case. So with that understanding, he made statements incriminating himself, and then they changed their mind. And those statements were then used against him in court, and he was charged. The new prosecutor threw out the deal. Well, that is prosecutorial misconduct. And luckily, Bill Cosby, for himself, I guess lucky for himself, he had a big legal team, a multi-million-dollar defense, and they were able to argue this and ultimately get his conviction vacated. But prosecutorial misconduct like this goes on in many, many different cases throughout the United States. Kamala Harris, our current vice president, her office was constantly being criticized when she was the California State Attorney General. All kinds of behavior, hoping to land people in jail. For example, there was a drug lab in California that was rendering false positives. People would get tested for drugs, and they would have not used drugs, but the drug lab would give false positives. And they never gave this information to the defense. So prosecutorial misconduct is going on across the United States. It just so happens that Bill Cosby, despite being guilty of assault and harming many, many different women, despite that, Bill Cosby, he was able to get a defense and get his conviction vacated on the basis of this prosecutorial misconduct. However, many other folks do not. So in this case, certainly no love for the respect for Bill Cosby after what he was revealed to have done. But at the same time, it also reveals a big, big problem. How many people in the United States have a public defender get dragged into court, get arrested, and don't have multi-million dollars and get sent to jail when the prosecutors have engaged in misconduct? I mean, it kind of reveals a problem with our legal system. No one's happy that Bill Cosby is out, but no one's happy about how it was they managed to get him. It looks to me like the prosecutors just wanted their time on TV. They wanted to get a famous, newsworthy case. They wanted to get an opportunity to get some time on television, so they broke their own rules, and you can't have that.
Well, that segues me beautifully into my next question. They're planning the same thing against the Trumps in the southern district of your own city, aren't they? What's the current state of the legal moves to prosecute, if not Donald Trump himself, although he's in the frame, but at least his family members?
Well, again, this is a situation where one looks over the history of Donald Trump and Trump University and Trump Airlines and Trump Steaks and, Trump's career. And it wouldn't be surprising if there was something there that a prosecutor could do something about. But why now? This has a lot to do with January 6th. This has a lot to do with Donald Trump being banned from social media, and that there's a lot written. There's books that talk about 3 felonies a day, and that professionals in the United States, they violate the law pretty routinely just doing regular business, and that the way the federal and in some cases state prosecutors operate is they're not prosecuting crimes, they're prosecuting people. They find a person and they're directed to go after the person and dig into their personal records, their financial transactions, and find a way to get the person. And it seems like that is the situation. I wouldn't be shocked if Donald Trump had engaged in some nefarious activities. I certainly have heard stories about Trump not paying people who do work for him, about people having to sue in order to get just being paid for basic services. I mean, I'm not here saying that Trump is innocent by any means, but the timing of the prosecution indicates divisions. Ronald Reagan, when he was president, he used to say, we're all friends after 6 o'clock. Democrats, Republicans, we're all good buddies. We're all on the same team here. It's not like that in the United States right now. After the incident in January on Capitol Hill, after the social media and their efforts to shut down some voices while highlighting others, they've got this new app urging people to turn in their friends for allegedly being extremists. It's down and dirty. The elite in the United States are at each other's throats in this time. And I put the prosecution of Trump and his business associates, I put it in that context, regardless of what the facts may be about the case.
And what's he doing now? I see that he's out on the stump, although it's not officially stump time. He's having rallies. I'm beginning to see more of him, which is difficult because he's banned, as you say, off all the social media platforms. But somehow his face is starting to appear again.
Well, they need him. Donald Trump is the Republican Party at this point. All the neocons, all the people that were supporters of Bush's war have been welcomed into the Joe Biden Democratic Party woke establishment coalition. What does it mean to be a member of the Republican Party? This isn't the party of neoconservatism anymore. This isn't the party of war hawks necessarily anymore, even though they're quite hawkish when it comes to issues like Iran and the Middle East. What does it mean to be a Republican? Well, at this point, all that it means to be a Republican is Donald Trump. We've got Joe Biden. He made a statement a couple months back where he said in 2024 he didn't know if the Republican Party would even still be around. So it seems like political divisions in the United States have taken this weird turn where Trump and his populism is the symbol of one side of the political spectrum, and this broad coalition of the establishment that says the United States needs a woke makeover to justify its foreign interventions on the basis of being an egalitarian, anti-racist, pro-LGBT power that goes around liberating people from evil populist dictators, that this woke coalition of American imperialism, they're the Democratic Party. The Democrats are no longer the party of left or opposition to the status quo. Meanwhile, Republicanism is simply synonymous with Trumpism at this point. We're in a very strange place politically as a country. That is absolutely for sure.
Now, I said at the beginning of the show, it is the 4th of July, and I wish you a happy one. You celebrate rising up and overthrowing tyrannical imperial power, but in a classic case of the abused becoming the abuser, you have yourselves become a tyrannical imperialist power. How does that feel, Caleb?
Well, it's one of the ironies of American history. But, I know your viewers may see it differently. But when you look at the American Revolution, the issue really was, should the United States develop economically? Or should it simply remain a trade hub in a global economic system, led by the East India Company and other corporations based in the city of London? It was a question of, should we have economic development in the United States, or should we simply be a trade hub in a global empire? And I think that question is still open. I think there are a lot of forces in the American government that at this point see the United States just as a trading hub in a global financial system where all the wealth and power goes goes to Wall Street, New York, or the London Stock Exchange. However, there are many working people that say, no, we don't want to be left behind. We need economic development here in the United States. We need roads. We need bridges. We need, hospitals. We need decent schools for our kids. And that there was really a question of economic theories. The American Revolution had a lot to do with the theories of Adam Smith and his free trade, libertarian, globalist economic model versus folks like Alexander Hamilton that argued that we needed to have economic development and that the state should set up a national bank to fund things like lighthouses and et cetera, and try to stabilize and build up industry in the country. There were two different economic theories at hand. It wasn't British folks versus American folks. In fact, most of the people fighting in the American Revolution had been born in your country by the time and just come over. So it wasn't a fight between two countries, but rather between two economic modes of thought.
So I can't tempt you back.
No, but I think, though, that there are a lot of people in the United States that would look at our current economic setup and say, this isn't really benefiting us. During the Cold War, 50s and 60s, the way this country was held together was you did have this prosperous middle class of industrial workers. And when they bombed Vietnam and they bombed Korea and they carried out coups, they were kind of benefiting from it with the economic stability at home. But the story of the last 2 or 3 decades has just been the demolition of this industrial middle class in the United States. Working class communities in the United States have been devastated. Look at Pittsburgh, look at Cleveland, look at Chicago. I mean, the heartland of America that was once full of prosperous industrial workers has just been destroyed. And I think this is a moment where a lot of working people in the United States, they're more critical of the wars than ever before. And there's now more opposition to the police state and mass incarceration than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And at this point, I think that there is an opportunity for that American chauvinist mindset to be challenged. I think a lot of Americans, at this point, don't harbor the hatred and contempt for people around the world that might be fighting for their national liberation that they once did. They don't support the wars, and they certainly don't admire Wall Street and the Pentagon.
Caleb Maupin, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, what was Jeffrey Epstein's nickname for his friend Peter Mandelson? My Sweet Lord, 34%. Baron P, 28%. PT, 38%. Only 324 of you have voted. You've got until the end of the show. Let me take some calls. I was going to give you one of these questions, but Vince is in New Mexico on U.S. politics. Go ahead, Vince.
Hi, George. Thank you for taking my call. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
And you, sir. Go ahead.
I was wondering how much British politics, in terms of the devolution with a D, the devolution to a two-party system from a multi-party system, was impacted by our close association, the UK-US close association after World War II and beyond.
No, it's always been.
Or do you think British politics evolved toward a two-party system on its own?
I think you probably followed us. We had a two-party system with the working people as they began to get the vote very slowly and very late in the 19th century, and all people having the vote not until the end of the 1920s. But as each new group of working people joined the franchise, the need for a Labour Party, a party distinct from the Liberal Party that working people had hitherto adhered to, became clear. And when the Labour Party was born and broke through and formed its first government in 1922, then in 1929, the Liberal Party began to sink. And we have, by and large, now a two-party system. There are challenges at the edges, if you like, from nationalist, separatist parties. The Liberals sometimes do better than others, but essentially we have a two-party system that I describe as two cheeks of the same backside, just like your country. Over to you, Vince.
Republican and Democratic Party are two broken wings of the same bird that flies in circles. That's my metaphor.
It's a very good metaphor, too. Vince, thanks for the call.
And I'm sure
Christopher is in Hong Kong, in China. Go ahead, Christopher.
Yeah, how are you this evening, George? Commiserations on events on Thursday.
Oh, don't worry. I'm quite proud of 22% after a 4-week campaign. That's pretty good, actually.
I fancied a bet on it. I would have put you down for 10,000 votes, actually, but we're not allowed to gamble here in Hong Kong into the UK.
Okay.
We can't do it. Unless you've got a UK credit card.
I thought Chinese people like to gamble.
Oh, they do indeed, George. But you're in Hong Kong, the government likes to control it and gets all the revenue from it.
Yeah.
So
something to be said for that.
A lot of hospitals.
Better that than William Hill, whoever he is.
A little naffed off with callers phoning in and believing nonsense about Uyghurs and minorities in mainland China. Just for the record and for myself, I've always been able to travel around China myself, no issues. The only issues you will ever have is if you put yourself down with a journalist visa, which takes about 14 days to process. But apart from that, you can freely travel around China. Of course, we've got COVID in the way now, stopping people visiting. But it was very strange that in November 2018, the region and the discussion, my daughter went on a school trip there to visit. Wow. So I don't think they'd be committing genocide or atrocities against the indigenous population of the region. And
allowing school trips from Hong Kong.
And allowing school trips. And a lot of the kids were not Chinese. Europeans, Asians, etc., because it's a mixed education system down here. And away they went and had a wonderful time. So,
very interesting, actually, that.
Camps,
very interesting, that, Christopher.
Is nonsense.
Well, look, China has locked up a lot of people that it thinks are radical Islamists adhering to the Al-Qaeda franchise called the East Turkestan Liberation Organization. This organization was proscribed by Britain and the United States as a terrorist organization until very recently, when inexplicably, at least with no reason given, they were taken off the list of terrorist organizations, even though their fighters have been found in Libya, in Syria, even in Nagorno-Karabakh, fighting for Azerbaijan. So you can make of that what you will. I know what I make of it. China is fighting...
I can put a final word in for you, George.
Go on.
Guantanamo Bay and the Yanks. All right? Guantanamo Bay and the Yanks.
Yeah, and look,
at least the Chinese are honest what they're doing.
Yeah, but they may not be doing entirely the right thing, is the point I was about to make. There is a danger. Look, everyone has to fight Islamist extremism. Everyone is fighting it, at least in their own country. They don't mind sponsoring a bit of it in somebody else's country. But everyone should be fighting Islamist extremism. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are the excrescence of the earth. Everyone should be fighting it. But we should fight it in a way that does not increase support for it, rather than decrease support for it. That's the only argument that I'm prepared to have with China on this. And I do have it with China on this. Last word to you, Christopher.
I have issues with China. I wish to God they hadn't closed down Apple Daily. I just think it gives Beijing's enemies something to beat them with. But, I'm not giving them advice, because I would have told them, no, just let it go, leave it alone, ignore it. Yep. You can't ignore terrorism, though, George.
No. Apple Daily is one thing. Terrorist attacks in railway stations is quite a different thing. Thanks very much, Christopher, as always, from China. In this week, in 2000, Tony Blair's eldest son, Ewan, was arrested. Why? A, vandalism. B, shoplifting. C, drunk and incapable. Answer right after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Tom says after independence we could choose the government we want. Tom, could you not have called me and argued that nonsense? Couldn't you? What's wrong with you, man? You've had the vaccine. Go ahead.
When I came out, I went into a boxer stance and started doing a jig. And an old fella said, "Hey, have you just had that vaccine?" I said, "Aye." And he said to his wife, "Come on, love, you better get me one of them." He said, "Make me dance."
So you're full of life. And Ben says, could Scotland actually do better autonomously? Like I want California to secede. But I think we'd thrive if not burdened by the rest of the US. How very revealing of you, Ben. How utterly revealing of you. And Philip says, how any Labour or Tory supporter has the nerve to say the SNP are corrupt is beyond me. Why do you people not have the guts to call up instead of cowering behind one single name on social media?
There's a lot of people in Bradford who won't be taking this antivirus due to religious grounds.
Simon, what do you mean by religious grounds?
Religious grounds, I mean, many Muslims, for example, have issues with regards to this vaccine. Certain things.
Tell me what issues? What issues?
Well, for example, pork.
What does pork have to do with this vaccine?
You're kind of, again, you're clouding the issue here. There's the religious...
I'm not clouding the issue. You said pork.
Of course
you said pork.
But
Simon,
other things which
Simon, are you yourself a Muslim?
It doesn't matter whether I am or not.
It does, because you are purporting. No, it does.
It's justified for people to ask that.
Be quiet for a moment, please.
No, I won't. It's justified.
Well, you will, because I'll turn your volume down. This is dangerous, reckless, ignorant, and potentially fatal nonsense. Get out of my sight and don't come back.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Now, Ewan Blair, in the year 2000, was arrested for being drunk and incapable. I had, as I so often do, some tangential connection to that event, because somebody that worked for me literally picked him up off the floor of the underground station at Westminster and asked if he was all right and did he need taken home. Ewan Blair said yes. Where do you live, said my friend. 10 Downing Street, said Ewan Blair. My friend took him home to 10 Downing Street. That's a true story. And we never said one word about it. Not something that Tony Blair would have done. I'm joined by the one and only Patrick Christys. Patrick, let's crack on. There's so much to talk about. First of all, is it coming home? England look hot to me.
I mean, it's looking dangerously like it might be about to come home, isn't it? I mean, it's the hope that kills you all the time. So every single time I've ever had any kind of tournament in my lifetime, for a split second, apart from when Fabio Capello was in charge, when there was never a split second, I've always thought briefly it might be coming home. This time, I think it might. I mean, 4-0, I mean, we just didn't mess about last night. You know, that's the thing. That's the thing. It's the lack of fear. Every single time, that's what used to kill us. It wasn't just the fact that we had, we had the superstars, we had David Beckham, we had the wags.
The golden
I've
generation.
not heard the word wag once.
There can't be a wag on this tour.
Southgate hates the wags, I imagine.
Right,
I think that's the key to our success. Fewer wags, more goals.
Yeah, well, that is an interesting theory. So
the
guys are champing at the bit. They might as well put it out on the on the field like a boxer. But as a Manchester United supporter like you, I've got to say, although I was sceptical at the beginning, that Sancho looks the real deal.
I mean, he does. It's amazing we haven't used him as much earlier. I think we've almost got an embarrassment of riches, a bit like the early Abramovich-Chelsea era, but without spending any money, right? Which is lovely. Sancho's obviously class, right? You don't do that kind of stuff in Dortmund if you're not great. But you've also got the likes of Jude Bellingham, who I believe has just turned 18 years old, apparently. I mean, if he was called Wayne Rooney and was born a few years ago, possibly would be considered the same thing. Jack Grealish comes off the bench and changes the game.
I love Jack.
It's brilliant.
If only we could have Sancho and Jack, it would be a world-beating...
Not on a night out.
No, not on a night out. I wouldn't like to go on a night out with them. Now, changes. Are they going ahead? Is it Freedom Day coming up?
Well, it looks that way, and I think there's a couple of factors that have come into play. Last time we were here, obviously, we were talking about Matt Hancock and the fact that I think he's now kind of desecrated all the coronavirus rules. And that, to me, means that anyone who wants to stand in front of us now and say that there's any more restrictions, they just simply cannot really do that. And so Sajid Javid, who's replaced him, has kind of got the dream ticket for me, which is basically turn up and be a bit positive, which is what he is saying. Now, there's nothing in the data, which we've heard before, say we have a rolling average currently today, I just checked on the way in here, of 17 deaths a day from coronavirus over the last 7 days. Now, if that's enough deaths to lock down an entire country or continue any kind of lockdown restrictions, I think I'd have serious questions about if we would ever get out of a lockdown there. But what we're starting to see now is Sage versus Sag, right? So that's what started to happen already. The Sage lot, whose job it fundamentally is just singularly to preserve human life, which I do understand, are now saying, hang on a minute, he's been a bit cavalier. We can't just treat it like flu. Well, to be fair, if we just treat it like flu, we'd have to accept more deaths every single year than what we might do conceivably going forward from the coronavirus. I don't
Or
think,
road accidents. I don't know how many road accidents there are in a day.
I happen to, actually. There's 550 deaths a day, which is 550 deaths a day on our roads. There's 555 cancer deaths a day in the United Kingdom, and 550 people die from a heart attack every single day.
So you can't shut the
reason I know all that is
society
it's the same
down.
number. I looked it up.
Yeah, well, it's very, very sage of you to know it.
Oh, thank you.
But you can't, I mean, 17 deaths is 17...
Of course.
Grieving families and so on, but you simply can't keep a society and an economy locked down with that level of fatality.
Not when more than half of all British adults have now been double jabbed. You see, that's the thing. We are seeing things like case numbers go up, OK, right, that's fine, but we're now not seeing a direct link in terms of hospital cases going up, in terms of deaths going up, which is great. Of course, like you said rightly, any death is one death too many. However, the singular reason, right back at the start of this, that we all really kind of consented to a lockdown was to preserve our NHS, to make sure it didn't become overwhelmed. The Italy-style scenario of things just spilling over in total carnage. Well, that's obviously not going to happen now. That's obviously not going. We'd have to have some kind of new variant that didn't respond to our vaccines and was absolutely a nightmare. Well, that doesn't seem like it's happening. So really, the idea that we could extend any kind of restriction beyond the ones that we've already got, July 19th, Freedom Day, or second Freedom Day, I just don't really see how you could possibly do that and get away with it, frankly, certainly in the public eye.
Now, we had some fun last week with Mr. Hancock's lamentable behaviour. And now, you know, it's like London buses. They're all coming along at once.
They are,
Michael Gove and his wife, the powerful journalist, have split. What can you tell us about that?
There's a lot of rumours going around about Michael Gove. Yes, I mean, it seems to come as a surprise. He's obviously hidden behind Hancock, which is a dubious thing to do at the best of times. My understanding is that there may well be something about to break about Michael Gove. When someone says to you, when you ask the question to someone relatively close to Michael Gove and you say, what could it be? And he says, well, it's one of 3 potential options. That tends to tell you something. And, you know, so we'll have to wait and see, obviously.
So someone else is involved.
I think one of those potential options, and it is a potential option, might be an absolutely massive shock. In terms of certainly might be a shock to his wife, definitely.
Wow, you'll need to whisper that to me off air. So he survives that. I mean, we're in the same boat that Hancock was. Boris can't sack anyone for infidelity,
No.
however colourful the infidelity turns out to be, because He himself he should have been horsewhipped many decades ago. He's a cad. He might have enjoyed it. He's a cad, so he can't sack anyone for caddishness.
No.
So does Michael go on and on?
Well, I mean, look, fundamentally, you never know what's going on behind closed doors. So, you know, in a similar situation that we had with Hancock, you just don't know what someone's marriage is actually like behind closed doors. We don't know how married they were for a period of time. There's no way of me personally knowing that. Yeah, I definitely think that Gove goes on. I mean, it looks to me as though it's in absolutely no one's interest whatsoever to necessarily reveal the potential truth behind this story. Gove is clearly very highly regarded, not just amongst the Boris Johnson, but also amongst a lot of Conservative voters. The phrase that you always hear about Michael Gove is, he's the most intelligent man in government. He's the most intelligent. Now,
I know him very well. I would say that is true.
So is he going? Should he go anywhere? It depends what he's done, I suppose.
It depends what he's done. But you're confident the media will not reveal what he's done? Why? Because he's close to Rupert Murdoch?
I think it's a question of... I think fundamentally it's a question of absolute proof, isn't it?
I see, yeah. There aren't three witnesses.
There is that,
OK, what else is rattling? The Keir Starmer had a near-death experience and is now roaring that he's coming home. It seems rather odd on the basis that if Labour performed at a general election as they performed against me and others in Batley and Spen, they would have fewer than 100 MPs. Just think about that.
I think it's astonishing, really, isn't it? I mean, the idea that Keir Starmer dares to put the spin on it and go, oh, well, look, you know, he's coming home. And his favourite line for me was, against all the odds. Well, what is that? The odds of you just... The fact that you're leader. So against the fact that you are the Labour leader.
And it's your seat.
And it's your seat.
And you called the by-election.
All the odds, right? We've managed to win this election that we occasionally have to do in politics, right? You know, I thought that was staggering. The fact is, as you rightly said there, if Labour lost that share of the vote nationally, I mean, he would go on to lose these. I think this is the worst result possible for the Labour Party. Because if he'd have lost, I'm not convinced he would have gone, but he might have done. But he's definitely not going now. And as long as Keir Starmer's in charge of the Labour Party, they ain't winning anything.
That might be why the Tories are not making such a fuss about the defeat.
It's a win.
It's a win for them to keep Keir Starmer as the Labour leader, don't you think?
I think so. I think it's your kind of League Two team taking a Premier League team to extra time, and it's a win when you're at an away day, you know. And it's look, as far as I'm concerned, I think the Tories should have won this, and I want to be very clear on that. I think this would be a disappointing result, should be a disappointing result for Boris Johnson. That said, if the end game, which it is, obviously, is that Keir Starmer remains in charge of the Labour Party, I mean, no one's losing any sleep.
It's not a bad bonus. Let's hear, Patrick, from George in Paisley. Go ahead, George.
How are you doing, George?
Very good, sir. Very good. Thanks very much.
I was phoning about gang stalking. Have you ever heard of it?
Who?
Gang stalking.
I'm not clear what you're saying. Giant stalking?
G-A-N-G. Stalking.
Tang. T-A-N-G. No, I've not.
No, G-A-N-G.
Oh, gang.
Stalking.
Gang stalking.
Gang stalking.
Right, go ahead.
I wondered if you've heard anything about it. Or...
No, I've not heard of it. Tell me what it means. I did see a gang of machete-wielding people in the centre of Glasgow on the news. Is that what you mean?
Was that today, or...?
No, that was the other day. I'll tell you what, have a wee lie down, George, and I'll go to Roger in Leicester. Roger, welcome.
What a privilege it is, I will say, first of all, George.
Thank you.
I tell you what, I heard over this weekend and yesterday that Brighton were launching racist sessions to be introduced, anti-racist sessions to be introduced into the curriculum this coming term with all their schools. Which, on the first face of it, it sounds brilliant. But according to form, this is something that is going to be bordering on the racism, the critical racism theory that is going to be taught.
I keep hearing about this, Roger. Patrick, what is critical race theory? I keep reading it, but I've never seen the theory.
Look, I've, to be honest with you, George, I've not read the theory. From my understanding, what critical race theory is essentially that people like me should say sorry for a lot of stuff that I didn't have not much to do with. I think it's the idea it taps into a lot of unconscious bias, subconscious bias, things like that, right? And it's the idea that by inherently just essentially being white, etc., you have therefore some kind of privilege, all of this stuff. So that kind of thing. It's an interesting point, that, by the way, because actually that's something that is rearing its head a lot in America now, because obviously it is always... I mean, America's never that far away from racism, is it, to be fair? But it's also something that's taking place over here now, and even as far as our national trust. Apparently in our national trust now, what you have to do is, if you essentially want to work there, you have to take some kind of anti-racist test. And then also at Oxford University. Now, if you want to remain in one of their colleges, you have to not only take the test, but get 100% in being a non-racist.
On that subject, that statue of Rhodes. I mean, I think Rhodes was a rogue, and his statue is of no importance to me. But all these people that are now saying they won't work with the statue there took the job when the statue was already there.
Yeah, and there's presumably some kids there who, bless them, possibly just don't they don't go care, right? And so you end up with now something like 100 dons and go, well, we're gonna go on strike. And there's a few people who are like, actually, I'd quite like to be taught, because we're paying for this, aren't we? So I find it an astonishing situation. I do wonder, especially when it comes to the statue things. I can understand the idea of. The one of that, was it Edward Colson or whatever? Is anyone going to miss that guy if you get talking to him? OK, fine. But instead of just tearing them down, can't we just have more statues? We could have more statues.
Let's have more. Let's have more, and let's have proper educational material on the wall underneath the statue.
And let it ride.
And let 1,000 flowers bloom. You can think Cecil Rhodes was a superstar, a rock star of imperialism. I could denounce them in equally vehement terms. That's what a democracy would do.
Well, this is the thing, and also what we're seeing now is that actually it's taxpayers a lot of the time who end up paying the brunt for this. So, for example, renaming certain street names. So there's a road name in, I believe it's Camden, it's called Black Boy Lane. Now, I don't have to know the exact history of that, but it sounds a bit rum, doesn't it? But actually, when you tear that down and replace it with a road name, actually it is taxpayers who end up having to pay for that. And at this particular moment in time, have we not got other stuff on?
Well, no, I mean, I condemn Ken Livingstone for many things, but one of them is that he allowed a road to be called after the man that murdered Wat Tyler and James Ball, the men that had come to parley with him. He got them into the tent for a meeting and cut their heads off. And Ken Livingstone was the mayor and could have called it Wat Tyler Way, but didn't. Let's hear from Kelsey in Rotherham. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Hey up, George. I just want to say about the BBC report on mistaken Bill Cosby for Bill Clinton.
Yeah, it was funny, that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I just want to say about that I can see why they were mistaken between the two. I can see why they were mistaken.
I don't know. One was white, one was black, one had been the president, one had played the president. But yeah, I get your point. They seem to have the same attitude to women, Yeah.
Anyway, about...
although Bill has never been convicted, so let me quickly put that on the record. It's all allegedly with Bill Clinton.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want to talk about the bin bags about battling Spen.
Yeah.
Honestly, I do believe that the Tories would win it. Unfortunately, I'm not a Tory, but I do believe they did win it. And it does, I mean, you saw this in 2019 in Peterborough, where there was allegations of the Labour Party also gained some voters, some possibly fraudulent ballots.
Well, we don't know that, of course, but one of the reasons why we don't know is that the recount was refused. Which was very unreasonable, because the law is clear that there should be a recount where the margin is less than 1%. These videos are remarkable. They remind me of some other elections in some other countries. Bin bags full of votes arriving in the early hours of the morning. I'm told by a counting agent from another party that I was ahead. I was in first place at 4 a.m. When suddenly a big slew of votes got thrown on the table, which I assume is the votes that were coming in the black bin bags. But on that point, Patrick, there is, not specific but general, there is a problem with postal votes in this country. Anybody that's ever fought Labour in the inner city knows that the dark arts of working the postal vote is potentially a stain on our democracy.
100%. And the difficulty, again, does come back to ultimate absolute proof. However, you don't necessarily always need that, in the sense that there's some things that are very obvious. Labour, for my money anyway, has two particular ways of usually doing this. And one of those is areas where there's a particularly high level of immigration, where in some of those seats they have a lot of people who potentially don't actually necessarily live in this country, who some way can get registered over here and vote. The other one is university seats. So Lancaster is a good one. Now, again, it's very important for me to now say there's no proof of this. However, Lancaster is a good option of this. When students move into second year, they normally go into a student house, and there's normally, let's say, there's 6 people to that house. Then they move again to another house in third year, and then they just go somewhere else. So you tend to have opportunities there where somebody may be registered in 3 or 4 different places within the same constituency, and if you were that way inclined, it's easy to see how you not only would necessarily be able to vote in that constituency, but in another one as well. And yet postal votes are rampant. What I do find fascinating, and don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely not for mandatory ID cards or everything, although at the same time I suppose anyone who drives got a driver's licence, so there's that. What I will say is the idea that a problem for me that the left has had at times is the justification for when you turn up to vote on polling day, why you shouldn't have to show some form of identification. Now, I get ID'd at Wetherspoons, right? So I would imagine that maybe if I'm casting a vote, I should have to be ID'd as well. I don't think that's too far-fetched, those two things. And so that implies to me that maybe they know something is going on, right? Because if you didn't, why would you bother?
Why would you make such a fuss about it? Look, a postal vote used to be, Kelsey, something that you got if you were literally unable to be there. You might be a soldier serving overseas. You might be a business person who's away on a trade mission. You might be bad with the legs. You might be stricken with something that precludes you going to the polling station. But there were 16,000 postal votes in Batley and Spen, and they can't all have been on a trade mission. Let's hear from Kieran in Sunderland on Labour. Go ahead, Kieran.
Assalamu alaikum, George Galloway. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks so much for your time. I would just like to echo what your previous. Well, the only thing I would like to echo is the echo of the dark person behind the curtain, as it was.
Yeah. It's funny this comeback, don't you think, Kieran?
Pardon me?
It's very strange, this Peter Mandelson comeback. Well, you'd think a man that had been sacked twice from the cabinet, pictured clothes shopping with Jeffrey Epstein, you'd think a man with his reputation would be kept out of sight. But he's actually on every TV and every radio interview.
Well, this is the reason why he used to be called the Lord of Darkness, Lord Mandelson.
Yeah.
The Dark Lord, let's get away from the comedy horror, because it is real. Why is this grotesquing rearing his ugly head back up? Is he trying to prove something? Is he trying to hide something?
To be perfectly... well, Kieran, to be honest, and I'll put this to Patrick, I don't think he's the one to blame. It's Starmer that's putting him up. Starmer is saying, can you be on the Today programme for me tomorrow morning? Can you be on Sky?
He has the democratic ability to carry on cultivating this yacht wearing this Speedo, wearing this Epstein enjoying.
Yeah, well, let's not go into his Speedos. Leave it there, Kieran, because I really don't want to get into Peter Mandelson's Speedos.
Not again.
Why Mandelson? What does this tell us?
I mean, it's possibly the only man more risible than something. I think I will not. The idea that Peter Mandelson can put himself up front. I mean, if you, as a rule, look like you sleep upside down in a cocoon, possibly don't go on national television and lecture anyone about anything. I think that's just the general rule. He looks like if you tried to shake his hand, he'd just slip off it, right? So I think so Mandelson's got nothing, right? It's pot kettle black, I think, regarding Mandelson. I don't understand why Starmer's done it. I just don't at all. I think it's possibly the worst. If you had to pick anyone, I'd rather no one had given that interview than Peter Mandelson had given the interview.
Raja in London. Go ahead, Raja.
10 minutes. You've spoken for the last 10 minutes. Give me 3 minutes.
Raja, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I have to say that, George, you have done a really good service and given voice to the suppressed people in Bari and Spain. And I have to give you all the credibility to actually give voice to the voiceless people of Bari and Spain. Labour thought that they could just ride the wave of the sympathy wave that it was actually there for Sister Joe Cox's sister. So she came in and she did that. You never see Keir Starmer coming in, doing the washing up or doing the convincing, doing the canvassing. He wasn't there. He wasn't there in Bari and Spain.
No, Keir Starmer fully expected to lose the constituency.
No, he was missing in action. Everyone was looking for him.
He came once for a photo call, essentially, and then distanced himself from it. Do you think, thanks, Raja, do you think, Patrick, that the Hancock business played at all in the Tory vote?
Well, that's what the Tories are saying, isn't it? That's what they're saying, which is that Matt Hancock has done us, right? Now, that may or may not have been true. I can understand why it might have been. I mean, the idea that any health secretary with his name at the bottom of the rules, etc., has been treating those rules as a contempt, I can understand why that might have played badly on the doorstep. What I will say, just specifically with regards to the Labour Party, just quickly, I think it's something that they've got a bit of an issue with, is it's entirely their own making. It's the identity politics they've been playing for a very long time. Now, if you try to put everyone into a certain pigeonhole and then try to appeal to all of those different pigeonholes, it cannot be done. So, for example, you cannot simultaneously appeal to your traditional working class vote at the same time as appealing to large swathes of the Asian community, let's say, and then appealing to the LGBTQ plus whatever it's called now community, plus on top of that then trying to appeal to the rampant feminists, etc. All of those things, whilst each and every one of those is entirely worthy in its own right, you cannot appeal to all of those things in its entirety.
Especially in the social media era.
No, you just can't.
Because everybody knows what you've said and promised to other people. Last call of the night, Gemma in Lichfield. Go ahead, Gemma. Gemma, are you there? Hello, Gemma.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
Gemma, go ahead. Gemma, go ahead.
Right, I want to talk about being honest in politics.
Yeah.
It's hard to be honest in politics because the whole thing is riddled with mendacity. But, right, if you're a lawyer, which unfortunately, what's his name? Keir Starmer is, he's spending all of his time being right about everything. And as Patrick Christys said, he can't appeal to every community. So he has to, in my layman terms, mark his territory and his cards, and I feel that he has to just say who he is. I know he went on the show with Piers Morgan and he did all those things. It's not good enough. It really isn't good enough. There were 4 other candidates and they were all better than him.
Yeah, OK, Gemma, thanks. I'm sorry I cut you off, but it's very late at night, and of course there's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I like listening to Mr. Bari Atwan.
He's very good, yes.
I always like him. He's a great speaker and he's got a lot of common sense. And his ideal solution of one state, Israel don't want that, but it's great.
Well, they don't want 2 states either, so perhaps you're as well fighting for the right thing.
And the other thing was, I was going to say, why no women callers? You just had one, so that's all right.
2 women callers, but we need far more, Norma. I know that people consider you to be an institution and that you'll keep the side up, but we do need more women callers. So I'm grateful to Gemma in Lichfield for that. Any other points?
Yeah, I always learn something new with you anyway. That's why I like listening to you. And I'm sorry you didn't win because, you know, personalities are the thing, aren't they, with conviction. And that's what you've got. And, you know, I just think that it's a pity you didn't get in because I don't get bored with you. And I know you've got to go now. I've got to go. Moats is the best. Keep going, George. It's the only way.
God bless you. No, as long as I've got breath, I'll keep going. It is a bit of a shrunken parliament, to pick up one of her points. No great figures in today's parliament.
No, there are. And I think I used to look back on, I imagine you certainly did as well, because you were literally in it, actually, at one point. But I used to look back on now, and I think at any moment in time, it felt to me as though if it all went to pot, there were a few people on either side of that bench who may be able to actually run the country. And now, I actually just don't think there are. In fact, I think there are shadow cabinet. I mean, Lord Lucan could be a Liberal Democrat MP right now. We wouldn't be any the wiser, would we?
He may well be.
He may well be, yeah. It's a problem.
It's true.
It's a problem, though.
Patrick, I used to walk along the corridor, even when I'd been there a decade, and look round at this big figure that was going past me. There was 100 men and women of independent mind, more than 100. There were big figures that, as you say, could have taken over as Prime Minister in the afternoon.
No longer.
In Harold Wilson's cabinet, it was said that there were 10 potential Prime Ministers, and all of them wanted to be. Patrick Christys, thank you for joining us. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. If it was, see you next week, God willing.